So friends, chapter 9, the idea of freedom. So this is the chapter we've been waiting for. This is the philosophy of freedom. The intuitive thinking is a spiritual path. So, as important as this chapter is, and as important as all the ideas are, in the first way, the first sentence may be the most important sentence. Because it sets the stage for everything else. The first sentence, for cognition, the concept of a tree is determined by the percept of a tree. Now it sounds so simple, and yet inherent in that, we begin to realize, wait a minute, if we're talking about freedom, if the concept is determined, the concept of a tree, is it a redwood, is it a willow, is determined by the percept. That means I'm not free to assume that a willow is a redwood. It's not. I can't put a concept onto something that where it doesn't fit. I mean, I can, but I won't get very far. So, for cognition, the concept is determined by the percept. Am I going to find freedom in cognition? I'll find lawfulness. Will I find freedom there? Interesting question, you see? But he has to remind us there is a lawful relationship. Now the reason, of course, the concept and the percept, in a certain sense, the percept doesn't condition the concept artificially. The concept is expressing itself in the percept lawfully. That's the way Aristotle would say it, yeah? So the concept of a redwood tree expresses itself in a particular form in the redwood tree as a percept that we observe, and the willow tree expresses its idea in the percept directly. But for the person who's cognizing the redwood tree, they perceive the shape of the leaves, the shape of the trunk, the bark, the height, the structure of the form, and in the percept, for the person who's cognizing the redwood tree, the percept already has inherent, is already pointing to certain concepts. Yeah? So for cognition, the concept is determined by the percept. In a certain sense, is an extreme way of saying it, but he's saying there's a lawful relationship already placed there. If we're looking for lawful relationships that already exist, what does that have to do with the idea of freedom? Question. Right? Yeah. Now, so in other words, it's not to say that discovering the idea, in fact, one of Rudolf Steiner's early statements is discovering the idea, finding the idea in reality is the true communion of mankind. The true spiritual communion of mankind is discovering the idea in reality. That's the true spiritual communion of humankind. But that's not necessarily freedom. There's an aspect of joy there that we all discovered the redwood tree has certain ideas, certain concepts. But in a certain sense, freedom is going to have to go into a slightly different direction than merely cognition. That's the point, okay? So cognition sets the stage. But cognition by itself isn't the full expression of freedom, because there's a lawful relationship already existing between the percept and the concept, and my job as a knower is to discover that through observing and intuiting. You with me? Now, so for cognition, the concept of a tree is determined by the percept of a tree. Faced with a specific percept, I can select only a very specific concept out of a general conceptual system. The connection between a concept and percept is indirectly and objectively determined by thinking about the percept. Yeah? The percept's connection with its concept is recognized after the act of perception. but their belonging together is determined by the situation itself. In other words, the concept is already there. It just arises for me after I observe the percept. Determined in that sense, yeah? Now he says the process presents itself differently when we examine cognition itself, or the relationship between the human being and the world through cognition. In what we've said so far, an attempt was made to show that it is possible to clarify this relationship through unprejudiced observation. A proper understanding of such observation leads to the insight that thinking can be beheld directly as a self-enclosed entity. What the heck does he mean by that? Thinking can be beheld directly as a self-enclosed entity. He's speaking about thinking as being an entity. What is he saying? What does entity rise in your mind? If something is an entity, what's another word?
A being.
A being. A being. Thinking is a self-enclosed being. There is a being present in the activity of thinking. Yeah. Possibly. Let's hold it as a hypothesis. Okay, possibly. Thinking can be beheld directly as a self-enclosed entity. Now the question is, who is that being? Is it me? Is it somebody else? Is it something else? Is it God? Is it an angel? Who is it? And if it is, and how am I related to it? Yeah. So those who find it necessary to explain thinking as such by appealing to something else, such as saying that thinking is a physical process in the brain or an unconscious mental process lying behind observed conscious thinking, misunderstand what the unprejudiced observation of thinking provides. To observe thinking, now friends, he's pointing to something, he wants us to experience this, okay? To observe thinking is to live during the observation immediately within the weaving of a self-supporting spiritual entity. We could even say that whoever wants to grasp the essence of the spirit in the form in which it first presents itself to human beings can do so in the self-sustaining activity of thinking. Okay, what's he talking about? So, let's do a quick exercise. So I'm going to write 5 words on the board. There are 5 percepts, okay? And each percept has a definite concept, yeah? So the wonderful thing about a word, friends, if I write a word on the board, the word has a structure and a form, but the word is a percept that I can write or that I can speak, but the concept is already built into it, yes? The fact that a word means something means that there is an idea in the arrangement of those sounds, yeah? So a word is a percept pointing to a concept. The wonderful thing about words is that the two things are pretty close together. Yeah. So when I write 5 words on the board, they're 5 percepts, but they each have a specific idea, a specific concept. However, when you arrange them in a particular sequence, they're pointing not to their own individual meaning as 5 different ideas or 5 different concepts, but the 5 words arranged in a sentence are pointing to an experience that the 5 words, just like each word points to a particular part of the experience, when you put the 5 words together, they come into a greater whole. Yeah? What I want you to do, friends, is to bring these 5 words to meaning. That is, you go beyond the meaning of each individual word. You certainly need to know what each of the 5 words means. Yeah? But you're not to focus on the meaning of the individual words, but rather how do the 5 words arranged in this particular way point to a different experience than each word by itself could do. You with me? So the exercise is this. Look at these 5 words. I would like you to, once I write them on the board, you don't need to look at the board again. It's not necessary. You can close your eyes, you can keep your eyes open, however you wish. But take the 5 words into your soul and repeat them silently. Not like a mantra and not automatically, you know, but rather take them as 5 different words, and you're trying to somehow say, or you're trying to lift those 5 words into they're pointing together toward an experience. And what we want to do is we want to lift our soul into the experience that those 5 words are pointing to. Okay? So that's the attempt. So I have friends, the reason I'm cautioning you is because I've had various people report, well, you know, when I started reciting the 5 words, I got in this rhythm, and boy, the rhythm was really great, and I was just reciting this rhythm over and over again, and that was really cool. That's not what I want you to do. Okay, please don't. I mean, yes, certainly recite them, but don't just get into the rhythm of them. And nor do I want you to form a picture of each word and get lost in that word. Okay? Or to substitute another word. Say another word for that is this. Oh, and an even better word would be this. And pretty soon, you've left the 5 words and you're off in la-la land having a great time, but you're missing the experience of what the 5 words are pointing to, you see? So stay faithful to the words, but realize that the words are pointing to an experience, and you're trying to lift your soul to the experience. And that's what I'd like you to go. So here's what I'd like you to do. Recite the 5 words inwardly to yourself, somewhat rhythmically. So, Then after a while, after you do that for about a minute, you're trying to lift your experience. You're still keeping the 5 words in mind, but you're trying to lift your soul into the experience that they're pointing to. You'll find it easier, interestingly enough, if you keep the rhythm and eliminate one word, but keep the meaning of the word. You are willing the meaning of the word to remain, even though you're not silently resounding, saying the word anymore. So, for example, now, the place is there. The meaning, I have to keep the meaning there, but I'm not inwardly reciting the word. I'm dropping the percept, but keeping the concept. You got it? So the concept is remaining. It can only remain through my intuiting it. See? Not by my perceiving it. You with me? So I will do that. For the first minute I'll recite all 5 words, then I'll drop one word as a percept, but intuit the concept and keep the concept intact, which takes a little bit of activity on my part, yeah? I have to keep my imagination and my thinking active. After reducing it to 4 words with a space somewhere, it doesn't matter which word you eliminate, by the way, don't worry. Any one word is fine, just be consistent, then stop reciting that word, but keep its meaning intact in the sentence, okay? Then after you do that for about a minute, drop a 2nd word, doing the same thing. Now you have 3 words sounding, and 2 spaces where you are intuiting the meaning of the word without sounding the word. Then you do that for a minute. Then you drop a 3rd word, and now you have 2 words sounding and 3 spaces where you're intuiting the meaning of the words without sounding them. Then you drop a 4th word, and you have 4 silences where you're intuiting the concept but not speaking the percept. Then you drop the 5th word. Now when you drop the 5th word, you will now have 5 silences where you are completely in the act of intuiting, because there's no percept anymore. You're not reciting any word. There's nothing to recite. But the meaning of the 5 words, you are living in your continual consciousness because you're keeping the pattern there. Yeah? Which means that you are willing your thinking. Okay? This is the point. You're willing your thinking. Now, I want you to notice where you are when you drop the 5th word. You're in a quiet space. There's no sounds. You should be. I hope that you will realize that you're in a sphere of pure intuition. Okay? That the meaning that you're experiencing is the meaning that you are intuiting. It is inwardly, the meaning is inwardly coming to you, not through the sounding of the word, but by your actively keeping in touch with the meaning of those 5 words, and you're lifting yourself into the experience. So friends, just notice where you are when you do the exercise, okay? And we'll come out of it. So I'll give you about 5 or 6 minutes to do the exercise. We'll each do it quietly. And then we'll come back to the experience and give it a try. So here are the 5 words. So did anything happen? Did you go anywhere? Anything you'd like to share?
I felt drawn up to the light. I felt really drawn up and out. I felt, not even my body, every now and then, whoa. I just felt like it was really drawn up.
Yes, good. You felt yourself elevating up into the light.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Anybody else? Was it easier when you silenced the last word?
It's more intense. More intense.
More intense. Okay.
But it was harder for me to silence that last word.
The last word, yeah. Clinging to it.
Yeah.
The light that I was seeing got brighter.
When you dropped the last word, the light got brighter?
Mm-hmm. But also there was a sensation of visually seeing more light, even though my eyes were closed.
Yes, of course.
So,
Yes. So you saw more light when you dropped the last word, even though your eyes were closed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I saw more because I was paying less attention to the words.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also got distracted, like in a normal meditation practice.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And so other stuff started happening. So then I used the words to come back to that
the root.
place again.
Yeah.
When I dropped the last word, the light dissipated.
The light disappeared when you dropped the last word. And where were you?
Oh, light was everywhere.
Light was everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Anything else that you'd like to share?
When I lost my word, and also the thing around me also lost. So I was in a place without anything, like an empty.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have a body, I didn't have any wall,
Yes.
I didn't have any noise. When I lost and the last word disappeared, it was all empty.
Yes. You were in a huge space, yes?
Yes.
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 Beautiful. Beautiful description. Yeah. Yes.
It's funny how the first word I dropped was light,
Yes.
and it started to change with each additional word I dropped.
Yeah, after you drop a word, you say, oh, I didn't want to drop that one. Oh. Too late. It's already gone. Yeah,
That's
already
the
gone.
last word I
Yeah.
dropped. Really?
It's really interesting, yeah. So friends, the thing is, you continue to have an experience without the percept. That's the point, you see? You were living in an experience without a percept. You recited 5 percepts, 5 sounds. You were trying to intuit the meaning, but in a certain sense, the percept was pointing to an experience, but the percept also, in a certain sense, was masking the experience. That's the interesting thing about a word. It's pointing to an experience, which is very helpful, but it can also become an obstacle to the complete experience of what it's pointing to. So by eliminating the percept, but intuiting its meaning, the experience that the word is pointing to, when you drop the word but keep the intuition, the meaning of the word comes into clarity. Isn't that wonderful? Mm-hmm. And those 5 words in particular lift us into an intuitive experience. So when Rudolf Steiner says we need to experience thinking intuitively, this exercise is one way to begin to introduce to us the idea that even without percepts, if we are willing our thinking toward meaning, we can continue to live in a soundless, silent space which is huge, filled with light and clear as a bell. That's the intuitive experience of thinking. And every time I do the exercise, I feel, why don't I do this more often? This is what I'm looking for. I'm chasing around the world and checking my email and running from one thing to another, but what I'm actually looking for is this deep experience of soundless meaning, rich, light-filled warmth, love, completely filling and completely wonderful. Yeah. So this is the intuitive experience of thinking. When Rudolf Steiner says that thinking is love in its pure spiritual form, and that intuitive thinking can be experienced as a self-enclosed spiritual entity, we just touched the hem of the garment of that experience. Yeah? You with me? So that's what he's pointing toward. This is the intuitive experience of thinking. Yeah. It's a very, very rich and profound experience. And every human being is capable of doing that. Yeah. So once we have recognized the intuitive nature of thinking, we realize that thinking brings concepts to us, but we can come into the pure intuition as well. Yeah. Rather than us experiencing the intuition, we're usually interested in the concept, because the concept that I stick on the percept is going to solve the immediate problem. Yeah? So I grab out of the intuition the concept that will most quickly remedy the problem that I'm having, and I plug it in and solve the problem, and I run to the next obstacle. You see? But again, we're not doing justice to the intuitive experience of what thinking really is. Because thinking actually is love, shining light and warmth and bringing threads of understanding from one thing to another, and yet the experience of the intuition itself is glorious if we'll stop ourselves and actually pay attention to it. It's actually tremendously rich. Yeah?
I wrote that down when you said it the first time because it sounded nice.
Yes.
And then when I opened my eyes again, I saw that was written on my paper, and it made
You saw what?
sense.
What, sorry?
The thing that you said, that thinking is love in a spiritual form.
Thinking is love in a spiritual form.
And I wrote it down without having the experience, and then after the meditation.
That was your experience. That's wonderful. Thank you. Good. So friends, when Rudolf Steiner speaks about us experiencing the intuitive nature of thinking, this meditation is one of the most rapid ways to remind ourselves of what intuitive thinking actually is. Now, we actually are living in intuitive thinking anytime we get an idea. But we grab the concept or the idea and run with it, rather than saying, thank you. We could at least say thank you. Because this has come about by this loving, selfless being who's giving it to us. And yet, we also feel that we are participating in it. It's not separate from ourselves. Yeah? We are related to this being. How are we related to this being? This is the question, you see? Let's just hold the question for a little bit. We'll go further into it. Yeah. So, page 137. Only when by means of unprejudiced observation we have wrestled through to the recognition of this truth about the intuitive essence of thinking can we obtain a clear path to the insight into the human organization of body and soul. We then recognize that the organization of body and soul can have no effect on the essence of thinking, even though the facts initially seem to contradict this. In normal experience, human thinking appears only in and through the organization of the body and soul. The organization of body and soul makes itself felt so strongly in thinking that its true significance can only be seen by someone who has recognized that nothing of the body-soul organization plays a part in the essential nature of thinking. The essential nature of thinking is silent, loving warmth and light. The body and soul experience it, but the experience itself is independent of the body and soul. But such a person will also see what a peculiar kind of relationship exists between this human organization and thinking. For the organization of our body and soul has no effect on the essence of thinking, but rather the body-soul organization retreats when the activity of thinking appears. We stilled ourselves, we've silenced everything, we've tried to not be distracted by sense impressions or by memories or by thoughts and other things. We've tried to put our full attention on the five words and their intuitive experience. So in fact the body and soul were stilled and thinking made its appearance. We had to will it, but it came about, yeah? Our organization suspends its own activity. Our body and soul make room, and in the space that has been made free, thinking appears. Now we do have to will it, but it will appear if we will it. Yeah? The effective essence in thinking has a double function. First, the effective essence in thinking represses the human organization of body and soul's own activity. And second, the effective essence in thinking replaces the body-soul activity with itself, with its own activity. Thinking steps in. Even the first of these, the repression of the bodily organization, is a result of thinking activity, of the part of that activity that prepares the appearance of thinking. We can see from this in what sense thinking is reflected in the bodily organization. Yes. This is confirming what we said yesterday about thinking being the brain reflecting the thinking. The brain isn't producing it, the brain is reflecting it. In what sense thinking is reflected in the bodily organization? Once we see this, we will no longer be able to mistake the significance of that reflection and take the reflection to be thinking itself. If we walk over softened ground, our footsteps dig into the earth. We're not tempted to say that the footprints are driven upward from below by forces in the ground. We will not attribute to those forces any share in the origin of the footprints. Similarly, if we observe the essence of thinking without prejudice, we will not attribute any part of this essence of thinking to traces in the bodily organism that arise because thinking prepares its appearance by means of the body. Thinking prepares its appearance by means of the body. Wow. My friends, this chapter deserves a great deal of contemplation and reflection. But are we more or less on the same page? Yeah. Here a significant question arises. If the human organization plays no part in the essence of thinking, if the body and soul play no important part in the essence of the intuitive experience of thinking, what significance does the body-soul organization play in the totality of the human being? If my body and soul are not producing the thinking, first of all, friends, let's notice that body and soul, there's a third source. What is the third source of our thinking? Spirit, you see? So thinking is a spiritual activity. We always wondered what the spirit is. The most immediate experience we have of the spirit is that it continues to live when we still the body and the soul, the spirit can continue to actively shine its light and warmth and love into our intuitive thinking. That's the activity of the spirit within us. Yeah? Now, so he says, the answer to this question, what significance does the body-soul organization play in the totality of the human being? The answer is that what happens in human organization as a result of thinking has nothing to do with the essence of thinking, but the body-soul organization does have something to do with the origin of I consciousness out of thinking. Here's the key. I consciousness arises because we have a body. Yeah? The real I certainly lies in thinking's own essence. But I consciousness does not lie in thinking's own essence. Anyone who observes thinking without prejudice sees this is the case. The I is to be found within thinking, but I consciousness appears because the traces of thinking activity are engraved in general consciousness, as characterized above. So he puts now a little statement in here to try to bring it to clarity. So in other words, there is a spiritual activity taking place. Yeah? And that spiritual activity is actually thinking, and the body and soul are receiving it. But the consciousness of the I is the result of that activity acting in the soul and the body. The consciousness of the I arises because the body and soul reflect that consciousness. The I actually is a part of our spirit, but the body and soul reflect the activity of the I, and therefore we become conscious of ourselves. Yeah? Yeah? In the same way, if I had a piece of clay and I wanted to make an impression on the clay, I would take a soft piece of clay and I would put my hand right into it and stand back and say, that I did that. That's my handprint. In the same way, we could say our spirit impresses itself into our soul and body by coming in, and then we can stand back and say, yes, that is the impression of myself. I made that impression. Yeah. So in a certain sense, the consciousness of the self needs the body to reflect the activity of the spirit. Therefore, the body and soul are a great benefactor towards self-consciousness. Self-consciousness. We're living as spiritual beings, but we're not completely clear of our independence until we incarnate into a body and soul. Yeah. That's the beauty of having a body and soul, is that they reflect our spiritual individuality. And every individual knows, as my children have told me many times, Dad, I want to do what I want to do. Okay. I hear you. Okay. That's a clear statement. So that's the spirit of that child who's saying, don't tell me what to do. I want to do what I want to do. Yeah. Now that's, when you hear that, you realize this is not the desire life of the child. This is the ego. This is the I of that child announcing itself. I'm here. Make room. Get out of the way. So that, you see, that's an important recognition. And we need to revere that, friends. That is to be revered. It's not that it can't be guided, but it needs to be revered. Yeah. Now, so this, he says, I consciousness therefore arises through the bodily organization, but let us not confuse this with the claim that I consciousness once arisen remains dependent on the bodily organization. Once arisen, I consciousness is taken up into thinking and thereafter shares in thinking's spiritual being. Once I become aware of myself, I can even become aware of myself independent of my soul and body. I can begin to think of myself as an individual once I've had the reflection of my individuality by the soul and body. In other words, by coming into incarnation, I gain what has been called in many different traditions eternal life. I become aware that I exist not only in the body, but also without the body. I become aware that my consciousness can sustain itself independent of the body. My consciousness of myself can now retain its individuality even without the mirror anymore. Isn't that wonderful? So friends, coming into a body that has been prepared to receive the thinking spirit is one of the great opportunities that we have to become self-conscious, to become aware that we're spiritual beings. So I love what it was a Teilhard de Chardin said, we are not human beings seeking a spiritual experience, we are spiritual beings seeking a human experience. He's absolutely right, you see. We're spiritual beings, but by coming into a body, we become human, and all of a sudden we have a reflection of our individuality. Hallelujah! Yeah. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah, so we become aware of ourselves by incarnating into a body. And even if the body falls away, we will retain the experience of ourselves. Therefore, we gain eternal life through the gift of thinking, through the gift of the intuitive experience of thinking. Therefore, I should never say, I am thinking. Rather, I should say, I live by the grace of thinking. Yeah, do we understand another aspect of that riddle? Yeah? Thinking is allowing me to become aware of myself. Thinking as a spiritual being that I'm a participant in. I am membered into that spiritual being, and yet I am also an individual. Wow. Yeah. Now, he's going to drop it for the moment, but he's hinting at it the entire book, okay? This intuitive experience that we had a taste of through the exercise, that we're all, I think we know what this is. This is a powerful experience that we want never to forget. We are a spiritual being. Yeah. Now, the I consciousness is based on the human organization of body and soul, from which our acts of will flow. I'm going to use orange because it shows up a little better. Yeah? Acts of will flow from our I into the world. Yeah? Following the preceding discussion, insight into the connection between thinking, the conscious I, and acts of will can be achieved only if we first observe how an act of will proceeds from the human organization of body and soul. Okay? Now here we go with your assignment for chapter 9. Okay? You've all got your page in front of you. So we're going to riddle through these different levels. Okay? So pull out your page that you've all filled out with answering the questions. So the assignment, just to be clear, the assignment was given the 4 categories in the column titled Level of Life. There we have perceiving as level 1, feeling as level 2, thinking and forming mental pictures as level 3, and conceptual thinking without reference to perceptual content is level 4. Initially, these are just jumbled words. You say, what in the world is this, right? 4 different levels. But Rudolf Steiner, in his text, he's going to make it clear what these 4 levels are. And for each level, there is a motive power or a driving force. And there is a motive, or a series of motives that correspond to each one of those different levels. So that's what we're going to riddle our way through. Now, so for an individual act of will, we must consider both the motive and the motive power. Now the motive, he says, is a conceptual. The motive has to be a concept. The motive is either a concept or a mental picture. A mental picture, an idea of an action that I have pictured before. I had a really nice smoothie the other day. I think I'll have another one. Yeah? So I have a mental picture of the smoothie I made the day before, and I'm going to take that mental picture and repeat the action out of that motive, yeah? So a mental picture of a previous action, obviously I put in a banana and some orange juice and some raspberries or strawberries, and so whatever it may have been, whatever I organized there, that the memory of that picture can be the guide for my action today. The mental picture of what I did before can become the motive of doing it again. Yeah? Now I'm not doing it new, I already did it once, and I'm repeating it because I really liked it. Or I could also say, boy, I'm never making that mixture again. That was dreadful, it tasted terrible, whatever it may have been. Yeah? So mental pictures can be the motive, but the motive is a mental picture in the case of something we've done before, or the motive can be a concept or an idea of something I'm trying out for the first time. Remember, the motive will be the guide of the will. What I do will be guided either by my memory of what I did before or by an idea of trying something new, a concept or an idea of something new. You with me? Mm-hmm. So the motive is an idea or a concept or a mental picture. So far so good? Mm-hmm. Now, the word motive power, I actually preferred in other translations, sometimes motive power is called driving force. It's a little bit clearer than motive power because the word motive is there. But power is the word to focus on in the motive power. It's the power of the will to deliver the action. That's what the power is. The power in motive power is what you're focusing on. The motive power is the factor of will that is conditioned directly within the human organization. So the conceptual factor or motive is the momentary determining principle of will. I might decide, no, I don't want a smoothie. I think I'll have an ice cream instead. So the motive can change. The motive rises. The motives come and go momentarily. But the motive power is more or less the permanent capacity I have, either to make a smoothie or to go and open the refrigerator and take a scoop of ice cream. In those two cases, yeah. So the motive power is, can I deliver? How do I deliver that motive? How do I make it happen? Okay? The motive power, the driving force, is what capacity do I have that I employ to make it happen? Am I good at it? Yeah? And do I know how to go about it? Now, so a motive can be a pure concept or a concept with a specific relation to perceiving, that is a mental picture. And the motive power is the abiding, determining principle of the individual. Yeah? By affecting the human individual and by determining that individual to act in a certain direction, a general and individualized concepts or mental pictures become motives of the will. Yet one and the same concept or one and the same mental picture has different effects on different individuals. The same concept or mental picture can cause different people to perform different acts. We had that the other day when I said, anybody ready for coffee today? Hands up for coffee? No hands. Is it too late? You don't need coffee. You got the philosophy of freedom. What is it? So interesting. The other night we had takers for coffee. Now it's noon and you're not interested. Wow, interesting. Okay. So that's just a picture that the motive will not always reside. The same action will trigger different responses. Do you entertain the idea? No, I'm not really interested. I'm not going to do that right now. So the motive is a temporary thing, but it will also, of course, be influenced by the power. Do I really love coffee, or is it just something I tolerate because it allows me to stay awake? Or do I really like the rush? So the motive power is more or less the permanent part of us, but the motive is the idea. Okay? Now, the same concept and mental picture will cause different people to perform different acts. Willing, then, is not merely the result of the concept or mental picture, but it also depends on the individual makeup. We shall call this individual makeup, following Edward von Hartmann. Hallelujah, Edward von Hartmann is finally getting strokes, instead of blows. Remember Steiner used to say, yes, Edward, you did this really well. Edward von Hartmann calls the permanent part of our being our characterological disposition. characterological disposition. Yeah, the way in which concepts and mental pictures work upon someone's characterological disposition gives that person's life a specific moral or ethical stamp. Now friends, the word moral means something differently to us than I think the way Rudolf Steiner is using it. We just want to be clear about this word moral, okay? Strictly speaking, the word moral has to do with what one does, what we do. Yes, what we do. Yeah? What we do, the actions that we perform. Yeah? Now, for many of us in the West, moral also has an idea, nature, which is it right or wrong to do that? Yeah? How moral is it to do that unconscionable crime? Yeah? So, in some cases, in many cases, Rudolf Steiner is using moral merely as the description of what one does. In a few cases, he's speaking about moral as also having the question of right or wrongness attached to it. And we need to be clear, well, we need to try to distinguish between those different usages. They're not that different. But for many of us, moral means moral majority, doesn't it? Or there's some connotation of right or wrong action, you see? And that's not, that's implicit in what Steiner's saying, but it's not the full of it by any stretch. Really, he's using moral to mean, what do you do with your life, you see? Your moral life is how you live your life. That's your moral life. Now, a person can judge it as right or wrong, but really, the fruit of your moral life is what you perform. Your deeds, what you do in life. That's your moral life. See? Now, some people might say it's immoral, and you can still say, yes, but it's what I do. It's moral in the sense that I'm the author of it. Yeah? You with me?
I get confused by that and ethical stamp.
Yes, ethical stamp.
Because ethical stamp very much to me implies right or wrong.
Ethical stamp does. Ethical stamp is much more on the side that we usually, I think, we tend to associate moral as ethical stamp. Yeah.
Okay.
So moral connected to the doing of something, and ethical stamp connected to what is the motive behind the action. Yeah.
So something could be both ethical but immoral.
Yeah, that's right. Ethical but immoral. Yeah, immoral. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now, okay. So our characterological disposition is shaped by the more or less lasting content of our subjective life. But that is, the lasting content of our moral life is what experiences have we had. You know, all of us have flitted. We've been all given rules growing up. Don't hit your sister, pick up your toys, make your bed, go to work, whatever it may be. We've all had right and wrong thrown at us throughout life. Yeah? But, so we all have mental pictures of the experiences, and somehow we navigate through life using the mental pictures, right or wrong. The voices that have informed our actions continue to live in us as mental pictures, don't they? My mother's voice, every time I sit down to a big plate of food, I hear my mother saying, eat it all. And I'm thinking, boy, this is way too much food. I can't possibly eat all this. But my mother said to eat it. So, I mean, it's not my mother's fault. I'm not holding her responsible. But my mother's voice continues to ring in me because she was a very important influence upon me. Yeah? So sometimes we find voices that have given us certain mental pictures about how we should behave, and they continue to run our life way into adulthood when we should have, in fact, maybe inspected them and rearranged them according to our actual being and dusted them off and put them to rest. So anyway, but we do have as a lasting content. Some people you would say, there are some people that if you ask them to steal something for you, they're just not going to go there. I'm sorry, they might love you, they might do anything for you, but they're not going to go into another room and take something that doesn't belong to them. It's just not part of who they are. You just don't ask them. You know what I'm saying? So, and because they have, their mental pictures and who they are as an ethical being, that's inviolate. They're not going to change because you ask them to. That's the permanent part of our characterological disposition. The mental pictures and the experiences that we've had No, I'm just not going to do that. Thank you very much. This is who I am. Yeah? So that's the permanent part. That's the driving force or the motive power. Yeah? So a certain idea, so the idea of robbing somebody, coming into resonance with a person for whom stealing is a crime and sin, those are not going to find resonance. A person is not going to entertain the motive of stealing who has the motive power, no stealing. Yeah? You with me? So that motive is not going to find any. It's going to have to find somebody else to do that. Yeah? To do that task if it's solved. So the motive power is the characterological disposition, the more or less permanent part. Yeah? So, my store of mental pictures is determined by the sum of concepts that have come into contact with percepts, and the concepts that have become mental pictures. These depend on my greater or lesser capacity for intuition and on the range of my observations. That is, on the subjective and objective factors of my experience, and on my inner character, and on my life setting. My feeling life. So friends, just to face it, as a Waldorf teacher, you know, you're not going to go out and party every weekend. We all know that, yeah? Waldorf teachers just don't do that. It's not, well, they could do that, but you're wondering, you know, why? You know, what's going on with that? You know, you would be reluctant to give your child to a person who went out and got drunk every weekend. Yeah? You just say, it's not really appropriate for that person, and I don't want to subject my child to that influence. I'm sorry. You know? I'm going to do what I can to protect my child from that influence. So again, our life setting also comes with a certain expectation and with a certain, you know, if you promise you're going to be a good teacher to a child, your life setting calls it up in you. That's also a beautiful thing about being a teacher, friends. You can't be as much of a rascal if you take on the life task of being a teacher. You have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and at least while you're standing in front of the children or adults, you have to walk your talk. Beautiful thing, yeah? So one can say our life setting is also can help reinforce our moral character and gives us the permanent stamp of who we are as our motive power. Now, we clear about all this so far? Makes sense?
So characterological disposition is motive power.
It is motive power. It is, absolutely. Yeah. Now, he says, but our feeling life is also a very important part of our characterological disposition. Yes? Whether or not I make a particular mental picture or a concept into a motive for action depends on whether that action gives me joy or pain. Yeah? I just don't want to do that. Yeah? It's not a bad idea. I just don't want to. You see, that's my feeling life. No, it was painful last time. I don't want to go there again. Or, of course I'll do that. Yes, it would give me great joy to do that. So our feeling life is also a part of our characterological disposition. Will it give me pleasure to do this or not? Now if you're melancholic, you may not mind hitting your head against the wall again and again, but it depends, of course, that's a part of your characterological disposition, to kind of rejoice in the sorrow and the suffering of life, and the melancholic stance, you see. But one could say the different temperaments, but all that's a part of our permanent characterological disposition, yeah? Our temperament is part of that. Our gender, all our religious beliefs, all of our previous experiences, the degree to which we have been honest or dishonest, all those different things come into the nature of who we are, yeah, our characterological disposition. Now, along with our feeling, will I enjoy doing this or not? These are the elements to be considered in an act of will. The immediate mental picture or concept becomes a motive, yeah, and determines the goal or purpose of my will, and the characterological disposition determines whether or not I will direct my activity toward that goal. The mental picture of taking a walk in the next half hour determines the goal of my activity. Anybody want to take a walk at lunch?
Yes.
This mental picture is elevated to a motive of will only if it encounters a suitable characterological disposition. That is, if in my life so far I've developed mental pictures of the usefulness of taking walks and the value of health, And further, if the mental picture of taking walks is linked in me with feelings of pleasure. If I'll enjoy it, sure, I'll take a walk, yeah? Thus, we must distinguish between, one, the possible subjective dispositions that are suited to making specific mental pictures and concepts into motives, and two, the possible mental pictures and concepts that are capable of influencing my characterological disposition so that an act of will results. The first are the motive powers, the permanent part of our character, and the second are the goals of morality, or better, the goals of moral life, yeah? The goals of what we do. By identifying the elements that compose an individual life, we can discover the motive powers of morality. The first level of individual life is perceiving. So here we are on the left side. First level of life is perceiving. Yeah? Particularly the perceiving of the senses. In this region of individual life, perceiving is immediately, without any intervening feeling or concept, transformed into will. The motive power under consideration here is simply called drive. Satisfaction of our lower, purely animal needs, hunger, sexual drive, or sexual intercourse, occurs in this way. The special characteristic of the life of drives or instincts is the immediacy with which the individual percept activates our will. Stimulus response. Yeah? This immediacy, originally belonging only to the lower sense life, can also be extended to the percepts of the higher senses. We react to the percept of some event in the external world without further reflection and without linking a special feeling to it, as in the case of conventional social behavior. And we call the motive power here tact or moral taste. The more such an immediate reaction to a percept occurs, the more suited a person in question will be to act purely under the influence of tact. That is, tact becomes the characterological disposition. So friends, under motive power, I hope under perceiving, what do you have there in that central column?
Tact.
Drive and tact.
Drive or instinct and tact or moral good taste, yeah? So drive or instinct, what he's saying about drive or instinct, the whole thing about this is that at the level of perceiving, there's a stimulus and there's a response. Yeah? So stimulus response. So that means that there's a kind of a knee-jerk reaction. An instinct to breathe, for example. Yeah? Someone covers your mouth and nose with their hand. Your instinct is to push the hand away because you want to breathe. Yeah? There's an instinctive response there. You don't have to reflect upon it a great deal. Yeah? Because you're, except how do I stop, how do I get the hand away so I can breathe again? Yeah? So drive or instinct, immediately, there's an immediate will activity. Now, friends, the whole point of this first level is, what did you put on the right side? What did you put for the motive? We haven't talked yet about the motive, but what did you put as a motive for level 1, perceiving?
Fulfilling need. Fulfilling need.
Fulfilling a need? Okay, anybody else? Did anybody write no motive? Because in fact, that's the right answer. There isn't a motive. There's a stimulus and there's a response, but there's only a motive if you have reflected upon doing something. See? So if you have thought about it, if you've reflected upon it, then you're up at level 3, thinking and forming a mental picture. But if there is a kind of a stimulus response without your thinking about it, so you go to the doctor's office, the doctor sits you on the bench and says, okay, I'm going to, takes out the little rubber mallet and taps your knee, and your leg moves. And you say, wow, look at that, you know. Now, so what did you have to do with moving your leg? Nothing. It was a stimulus response. Your leg moves immediately. So the immediacy with which the body reacts through an instinctive response, you didn't have to reflect, okay, when he taps, be sure that when he taps the mallet on my nerve, that I'm going to move my leg, right? Because I got to keep this guy happy. That's not going on at all for you, right? In fact, you may even do it before you even think about it. Tap, oh, what happened? But your leg moved. Because, So your thinking has nothing to do with stimulus response at this level. If you're thinking about your response, you're already moved up to level 3. You're thinking and forming mental pictures. We clear about that? So the right answer for the motive column on level 1 is no motive. Yeah? No mental picture, concept, or intuition. An act of will springs directly from perceiving or sensing as if by reflex without reflecting upon it. You're not thinking about it. You're just doing it. This makes Nike happy. Yes? Just do it. This is the level where Nike is really active. Yeah? Just do it. Yeah? But really you would say that, yeah, so there's no thinking about it at all. Now, the second sphere of life is human feeling. Particularly feelings accompany parts of these. By the way, the second part of that, the tactile moral good taste, you know, we learn to ignore certain sounds and smells that happen in public. You know, we learn to be polite, you know, to apologize, you know. And people may or may not apologize, but there are certain bodily functions that we just tolerate, and we don't, you know, we know it's better to keep our mouth shut than to call attention to the fact that somebody just burped or did something else, you know. So tact or moral good taste becomes a part of our habit life, even though it may be embarrassing. Instead of breaking down into outrageous humor or laughter or pointing at somebody and ridiculing, we don't do those things, you see. So we have learned by tact or moral good taste just to not go there. Yeah? So tact or moral good taste is actually learned behavior. We learned it at level 3. We had to think and form mental pictures about it, but perhaps maybe somebody had to teach us, you know, that's really not polite, don't do that. Oh, okay. So then it starts to become part of our habit life, and it sinks down to kind of do an instinctive response. It's almost like when, you know, it's the same thing that happens when the phone rings. When the phone rings, you pick up the receiver and you say,
Hello.
Why? Why do you say hello?
That's what you say. Habit.
That's what you say.
Hey, most don't speak English, they say.
That's true. See, people don't speak English, don't listen. But when you're racing to the phone, you're not saying, oh my gosh, what will I say? You know, I mean, you pick up the phone and hello is automatic. It becomes a part of your moral good taste. Yeah, it's a part of your tactful behavior. It's just and have a nice day. Or smiling at somebody, you know, is a part of our normal routine. It becomes instinctive. To smile at somebody, of course you can mean a great deal with a smile, but you can just smile at a stranger just because it's a polite thing to do. And they'll smile, maybe they'll smile back, who knows. Yeah. But it becomes a part of your habit life. That's the whole thing about this first level. It's almost habitual. It's almost instinctive. Even social behavior becomes habitual. Have a nice day. Don't tell me what kind of day it is. You know. So, now, the second level of life, second sphere of human life is feeling. Particular feelings can become motives of action. If I see a hungry person, my compassion can form the motive power to act. If a person rouses me to compassion, I might in fact act out of the feeling of compassion. Yeah? You poor thing. Yeah? Now, such feelings, so the feelings that immediately give rise without further reflection, the feeling itself now is the driving force, unleashing an action. The feeling is triggering the action. Now, if I'm thinking about what I'm feeling, I'm already at level 3. So you know what I'm going to say about the column about motive? No. At the level of feeling? There isn't a motive, you see? The specific feeling moves you to act without reflecting on it. Now, if you think about what you're going to do, it's not the feeling, it's your thinking about the feeling. What should I do? Then you're at level 3. You're thinking and forming a mental picture. But if your feeling life is immediately responding to a situation, then the feeling life is actually the motive power that's giving rise to the action. Yeah? So he says, such feelings include shame, pride, sense of honor, humility, remorse, compassion, vengeance, gratitude, piety, loyalty, love, and duty. And he gives credit to Edward von Hartmann. He's got a whole list of these things, and you should take a look at them. Yeah. God bless Edward von Hartmann. So these feelings, again, he's talking about the raw feeling, not the reflecting upon the feeling. So you could say vengeance is a feeling. Well, it might be, somebody cuts you off in traffic and you immediately floor it, or you honk your horn, or you do something else. So it may be, but you see, no reasonable person would do that. No thinking person would do that, but a person who is responding to the feeling life could immediately do something that they might regret. Yeah? And the person sitting next to them say, you know what, that's really not a very good idea. I'm reflecting upon what you're doing, and I can see you're not reflecting, you're doing it. Yeah. So step back from it. Yeah. So we can say a crime of passion. A feeling sweeps you away, and you're not thinking about what you're doing, but you just do something. Yeah. So the feeling itself becomes the power, and at that level, it's not the motive. In fact, that's why a crime of passion is judged, a level 2 crime of passion is judged differently than a level 3. Was there a motive? You see? Did you think before you did this? Or did you just do it? Yes. Out of your feeling life. So the first 2 levels are actually both just do it. Now the third level of life is thinking and mental picturing. Through mere reflection, a mental picture or a concept can become a motive for action. Mental pictures become motives because in the course of life, we constantly link certain goals of our will to percepts that recur more or less in modified form. You come to a stoplight, and there's 3 lights. There's a red on top, yes? There's a yellow in the middle, and there's a green on the bottom. You don't drive up to the stoplight and say, gee, this is a percept, I wonder what it is. So then you keep seeing these at every major intersection, and hopefully because they keep occurring over and over again, and you keep acting the same way toward them, that doesn't mean you just run right through them. It means that you're paying attention to the color, yeah? So in other words, certain things happen over and over again. So, mental pictures can become motives because we constantly link certain goals of our will to percepts that recur over and over and repeated in more or less modified form. Therefore, people who are not without experience are always aware, along with certain percepts, they're always aware of mental pictures of actions that they themselves have performed or have seen others perform in similar cases. This is how we learn, friends. We learn how to do the dishes by watching our mother. We learn how to wash the floor. We learn how to prepare the car by watching somebody do it. Yeah. So the situation calls up a picture of an action that we either have done before or that we've seen somebody else do. We call this motive power of the will practical experience. You all got that one, yeah? Mm-hmm. So the practical experience is the motive power, the driving force for the third level for thinking and forming mental pictures. Now there are 3 different. So let's just make a practical example of this. You're driving out, and you have a flat tire. Your cell phone doesn't work, you can't call AAA, there's nobody on the road, you've got a flat tire. Now you've never changed a flat tire before, but you've seen somebody change a flat tire. So you get out of the car and you say, well, I remember they went back to the trunk, and the thing else was back there. Or so you take the key and you open up the trunk, and you open it up, and there's a floorboard, and there's nothing, just a floorboard. You say, whoops. My goodness. So, gee, and then you notice that there's a kind of a latch there, and maybe maybe there's something under the floor. Oh, look at that! There's a tire in there. Hallelujah! Now what? And so there's a tire in there. What do I do? But the tire is not the same size. Wait a minute. Somebody gave me a toy tire. Wait a minute. They didn't give me a real tire. This is too small. Yeah, anyway, so we didn't worry about it. So, but there's a tire, and now the question is, does the tire have air in it? Hopefully there's air in that tire, because it doesn't matter if I put that one on if it's flat. So, and now the question is, how do I get that tire out of the floorboard and get the one off the wheel and trade places with them, right? Yeah. Now comes the problem. Okay, I've got to figure out how to loosen the thing from the car, and I've also got to figure out how to get the car up in the air. Right? Because I know I can't change the tire with the flat tire on the ground. Yeah. So now the beauty of the jack. Have you all dealt with jacks before? Yeah? Jacking up a tire, jacking up a car. You've watched it. Boy, are you in for an experience? Yeah. So what you do is you realize there's got to be something in there that looks like a jack. What's this scissor-like thing? Oh my God, oh, maybe that's a jack, or what is this thing, or whatever it may be. But then you have to figure out how to assemble the jack, because usually it comes in one or two pieces, and you got to put the right thing together. And then you get out of the car, and then of course you got the hubcap on there, and where's the nuts? Oh, they're behind the hubcap. How do I pry off the hubcap? Fingers don't work. Oh, there's a little sharp edge like a spoon. Pry. Hubcap comes off. Hallelujah. Okay. Now you've got the bunch of lug nuts, yeah. And you've got a wrench. I need a wrench, something to loosen these lug nuts. I look back and there's a little lug. It looks like it fits exactly. Hallelujah. So now I got to figure out. So I got to jack the car up, right? So I jack the car up. I also got to figure out where to put the jack and how to make it operate and how to make it go up and down. All these are new experiences that I've never done them before. Even if I've seen them, when I first do them, they're new, you see. So I jack the car up in the air. I've done this over and over again. I jack the car up in the air, and now I take the lug nut, I take the wrench to the lug nuts, and I try to crank them down, and guess what? The tire spins. Oh, because I should have broken them free while the tire was on the ground, so I had to let the darn jack down again until there's enough friction that I can break the lug nuts loose. So don't make that mistake. I can't tell you how many times I've done that. And so you break them loose, of course, by righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. You remember that? So you got to make sure that you're tightening it or loosening it the right way. And sometimes you need extra weight, so you can actually stand on. You can actually step on the jack and give it a little bit of extra leverage. And hopefully you can break all those lug nuts loose and get them loosened up. You jack the car back up, and then you can pull the nuts off, and then hallelujah, the whole tire comes off. Wow, that's great. So you take the flat tire and you throw it aside, and you take the tiny spare toy or whatever it may be in there, and hopefully there's air in it, and you stick it on there, and again you tighten the lug nuts by hand, right? And then you try to crank them down, and you say, no, I can only tighten them so far because the tire is spinning again. So then you've got to let the car down with enough, again, so that the tire is going to be friction, and then you tighten them up completely, but not so tight that you can never get them off again, but not so loose that they're going to fall up. I had that happen once. I didn't want to over-tighten the nuts, and boy, one time the wheel fell off. It was not a good experience. So anyway, and then you take the spare, you take the tire that you put off, and you throw it all in the back of the car, and you drive away. Yeah? Now, friends, so this is called practical experience. If you've seen somebody do that, hallelujah. If you've done it yourself, better yet. If you've never seen anybody do this, you might have a manual in the car that will try to describe this if you're lucky. But if not, you're kind of stranded unless you can figure this out for yourself. You see, so practical experience becomes the mental picture of doing something that you have done before, or that somebody else becomes the driving force for your fixing the tire. In fact, you can even pull off and help other people who have the same problem that you did. Oh, you got a flat tire here, I know exactly what to do. Yeah. So now your practical experience becomes your motive power, becomes your characterological disposition. I know how to fix a tire. Yeah. Now, so that becomes, that practical experience actually includes the whole field of everything we have done and thought about. So mental pictures as the source of practical experience are huge. That's really important that we have that capacity. It may even be that I can figure something out using the little bit of knowledge I have about one thing and a little bit from another field. I might even be able to form new ideas and new mental pictures and arrange things. I maybe have never changed the computer part, but perhaps I could extend my knowledge of repairing a tire into replacing a part, who knows. So in any case, but practical experience becomes the motive power. Now, there are 3 different levels that he's articulating for us. Let's go ahead to the motive at these levels, can we? Mm-hmm. So, the motive, he says, what's the basic motive at the level of practical experience, thinking and forming mental pictures? What's the kind of the primary motive? I want
action. Do you mean action?
It's egoism, yeah? Egoism, yeah? In other words, I'm going to do this out of my practical experience because I have a mental picture of my own well-being or of someone who's dear to me, their well-being. So egoism becomes the motive the mental picture of my own welfare or the mental picture of someone else's welfare can become a motive. I want my family to be fed. I want my wife to be happy because happy wife, happy life. Or I want to make myself happy. Now, so there's pure unadulterated egoism. I'm just going to do what makes me happy. And then there is the morality of prudence. If I don't take care of my wife, I'm going to be miserable. So I'll take care of my wife, and then I'll be happy too. There's a morality of prudence to do the prudent thing. Yeah. No. So both of these are different kinds of egoism. But basically, we have a mental picture of our own happiness. Usually a happiness that we've experienced before that we're trying to re-establish. Yeah? Because practical experience means we've already done it before. Now friends, we have to realize there's very little room in this category of practical experience for innovation. There's a little bit of room, but more than likely, if we're trying to replicate a happy time, we're going to look back to a time that was happy, and we'll try to take the wife back to the same restaurant, or or to the same beach, or to some place where they were happy before. See, so we could say we have already done it once before, and we're trying to do it again. Yeah. So egoism, the fulfillment of one's pure desires, or the trying to take care of people that we love so that they'll be well and happy. That's the level of egoism. Now there's a second level of motive in the practical experience that you mentioned. So with the second level of motive, I can respond not only on the experiences of pleasure or displeasure that I've had before, which are my mental pictures of enjoyment or displeasure, but I can also say I can begin to operate out of moral principles based on authority. You know? Moral principles based on authority. So, so-and-so says that one should do this. Confucius says, Rudolf Steiner says, President Obama says, however it may be. Some authority figure, my teacher says, my bookkeeper says, whatever it may be. Someone who I revere as an authority tells me what I should do. And I take my motives from them as a moral principle. In general, it's better to do it this way than this way. I revere the authority, and the authority's voice then sounds in my head whenever I'm going to make a decision. So the voice of the authority continues to ring in my soul as a moral principle. Thou shalt not kill. Does that mean the ant that's crawling across my food? Or does that mean my brother and sister? Or what, at what level? So these are conditional situations we have to figure out all the time. Now, but if we put our trust in authority, if we're acting out of a moral principle given to us that's based on authority, usually they're given as an abstract concept. Yeah? Thou shalt not kill is a concept. It's a noble concept to strive toward. But that means, should I not eat meat? Should I not eat carrots because I have to kill the carrot when I pull it out of the ground? What does it mean, thou shalt not kill? I can't walk across the lawn and obey that commandment because I'm more than likely going to step on a bug, yeah, and kill it. So at what level do I take thou shalt not kill as a principle, and to what level do I apply it? I have to, it's a conditional situation. You with me? Mm-hmm. But if I'm basing my life on thou shalt not kill, that was given to humanity by a revered authority, and I will try to operate by that moral principle. And my mental picture of that principle will then run my life, more or less. Yeah. Now, and there's two ways that can arise. There's two levels of the moral authority speaking. There's the commandment of the authority directly. Moses gives 10 commandments to. Well, Moses receives 10 commandments and delivers them to the people. Yes. So these are 10 rules to live by. For example, there are lots of different people who have given laws to live by. So it could be a commandment that came directly from an authority, but friends, it can also be the inner voice of conscience, but conscience as an internalized voice of your mother or your teacher or the authority figure that continues to live in your soul. Yeah? So when I spoke of my mother troubling me every time I sit down to a plate of food that's too big, saying, eat it all, I had to wrestle with my internalized mother's voice. It's not my actual mother, it's my mental picture of my mother saying, eat it all. Yeah? You see? So, so in a certain sense, but these are, you could say the driving force here, the motive power is practical experience, and the motive is, I want to do the right thing. The moral principle coming from an authority tells me what the right thing is. Now, friends, there's this lovely woman named Irma Bombeck who wrote lots of books about child raising families and stuff. And my mother was a real fan of Irma Bombeck. But one of my favorite lines in Irma Bombeck was, if you don't know what gift to give your children, give them guilt. Guilt is the gift that keeps on giving. Terrible, but she's absolutely right. Because guilt. If you can make a child feel guilty, they will feel guilty the rest of their life. We have to be really careful about how we project guilt upon people, friends. We really do. It's a dreadful thing to another human being. They will have their own experience of guilt, but we do not necessarily need to reinforce it. Yeah, and we certainly don't want to make our children feel guilty about basic needs, So anyways, but guilt is a picture of an internalized voice of conscience, an outer voice that now runs my life all the darn time. Obviously, we're not free if we're fulfilling the commandments given by somebody else. We may be lawful, we may be obedient, we might find our way to heaven even, if we're lucky, yeah? But we're not free. We may be living the lawful life, but we're not free necessarily at that level. We're doing what somebody told us to do. Yeah? You with me? That's the second basic level. The third level of motive in practical experience is moral insight. Yeah? Did you get this one? Moral insight based on mental pictures. Moral insight based on mental pictures. In other words, why shouldn't I kill? Or what should I kill and what should I not kill? Yeah? So moral insight. I want to figure out for myself. It's not enough for me to have an authority telling me what to do. I want to figure out for myself what the right thing to do is. Yeah? So developing moral insight is important. So there actually are three different levels here. The first level is I want to live my life. My moral insight is I want to live my life in such a way that the greatest possible welfare for humanity will result from the way I live my life. I want to benefit the welfare of humanity. That's the way I want to live my life. Therefore, I will try not to pollute. I will recycle. I will, try to cut down on greenhouse gas. I will try to do all the things that I think are the right thing to do, yeah? Based on the mental pictures that I have. Now, we just need to notice that the greatest possible welfare of humanity, the word welfare means one thing to Democrats, and it means something else to Republicans, yes? The word welfare in our time is a loaded word, isn't it? Yeah. So, greatest possible welfare of humanity, who are you talking to? And where are you coming from? Who are you when you're saying what do you expect to be the best welfare? By welfare, do you mean we're going to give everybody a free ride? Or do you mean you're going to ask everybody to do the right thing and to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps? Different picture. Yeah? So we won't find agreement about this way of living. A person can be living their idea of the greatest possible welfare of humanity, and other people will say, what are you doing? That's terrible what you're doing. Well, I'm living according to my ideals. Yes, but I don't agree with those ideals at all. So we will have different pictures about what welfare of humanity means. But there's some people, that's a higher step in terms of moral development than just acting out of instincts or egoism. Yeah. I'm trying to do the right thing. Maybe I'm wrong, but at least I'm trying to do the right thing. You with me? Mm-hmm. Now, the second level is, my mother said, my mother died in 2011. She was 102 years old. She was born in 1909. And she said to me many times, Brian, I have seen, I've lived a long life. She became 3 in 1912. She remained everything. She knew virtually everything for 99 years of that 102 years. She was conscious. Mm-hmm. And she says, I have not seen humanity progress. Mm-hmm. I do not think that people are better now than they were when I was a child. In fact, I think they're meaner, they're more selfish, they're more self-involved, and they're more likely to rip each other off. And my mother was a very powerful person. She was a cleric and she was a Scorpio. God bless her. But she saw it, she told it the way she saw it. I don't think that all these technological advances, I don't think that what's going on in the world is making us better. I do not see the culture as progressing. I think the culture is regressing. That was her picture. Now, there are some people who would like to say, you know what, cultural progress and humanity's evolution, humanity's moral development to a higher stage of perfection, I would like to live my life so that humanity will progress, so that our generation does better than our parents' generation. Yeah. Now, there aren't that many people who really, I don't know, who feel that way, but there are people who do feel that way. Yeah. So cultural progress or humanity's moral development perfection, again, I won't find agreement about what that means, necessarily. It will be based on the mental pictures of my particular place. Friends, let's face it, the picture of welfare of humanity might be, if you're Julia Butterfly Hill, you have a picture of saving the redwoods as trying to do the right thing for humanity. But if you're a family who survives by logging, and there's somebody sitting in the tree preventing you from cutting the tree down, you have a quite different picture. You know, my kids are going to starve if I can't have that lumber. You're not going to let me cut down this tree, my family's going to starve. What are you going to do? You see, so the picture, so we have to realize that there are different points of view in these stances. Not that one is right and one is wrong, but we need to realize we're coming into tenuous waters here. We're not going to agree about what welfare of humanity, nor are we going to agree about what progress of civilization is. But he says the third level of this actually goes into level 4. Yeah? The fourth level we haven't talked about yet. Thinking and forming mental pictures, that means that we are perceiving things and we're forming mental pictures about what we're thinking. Yeah? So that thinking and mental pictures, a lot of our conscious activity comes out of level 3. But there's a fourth level that he describes as conceptual thinking without referring to a perceptual content. What the heck does he mean by that? Sorry?
Are we still?
We're level 4 now.
Okay, but you said there were
there's
three
a third,
levels to the moral.
There is, and the third level actually goes up into the fourth. Yeah, the third factor actually goes into level 4.
Thank you.
Okay.
So that's now intuition, right?
Yes, it is. It's intuition. It's conceptual intuition without referring to the percept. Now, friends, that's what we tried to do when we put the 5 words on the board. We started with the percept, we repeated them and formed a concept of each of those words, but then we tried to develop the intuitive experience of all the words, and we ended up doing what I'm going to do right now. We erased them. And by the time we were done, there wasn't any percept. There was just the pure intuition ringing in our souls. Yes? So, if we can lift ourselves to pure intuition without referring to a percept, think of the possibilities. Wow. Infinite possibilities. Yeah. Infinite possibilities. As long as I'm, remember, for cognition, the concept of a tree is conditioned by the percept of the tree. But what if you're in a realm where the percept isn't there? You're in the realm of pure intuition. If you're going to intuit, if you're going to think, you're in the realm of pure intuition. The possibilities are endless because the possibilities aren't conditioned by the perceptual world. There isn't a percept yet. You're going to invent something that doesn't exist. You're going to think of something that doesn't yet have a perceptual content. You're going to imagine something. You're going to invent something. You're going to innovate. You're going to improvise. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. This is acting out of pure intuition. I'm not starting with a percept and trying to find what concept lawfully belongs to it. I'm going to start from the pure intuition and let the intuition guide me toward arranging percepts. I'm going to invent something. Yeah. So, at this level, he calls the motive power not practical experience. Nobody's ever designed falling water before. Falling water is a building, you've all seen pictures of it, where Frank Lloyd Wright used to go, he did have some premises, he did have some prerequisites. Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect, used to go out to eat a lot. He loved to go to restaurants. And he noticed that waiters and waitresses would carry very heavy loads of food on a big tray, and without having 4 columns or 4 hands holding up each corner, he noticed that they could carry a tremendous amount of weight on their 5 fingers upraised, without tipping over, without falling over. So Frank Lloyd Wright was a good observer. He said, how come they can do that with a tray of food and we can't do that with a building? Maybe we could hold a tray of a balcony up over a waterfall, the same way a waiter or a waitress holds something balanced on their hands. So Frank Lloyd Wright used what's called a cantilever to design the falling water. Do you all know falling water?
Yeah.
Falling water is just beautiful. You've probably seen a picture of it. It's this beautiful cantilevered concrete, a series of balconies cantilevered out over a waterfall, and it looks like a series of these forms jutting out over space, jutting out over a waterfall which is running underneath the house. So falling water in western Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, is a beautiful building, but he took the idea and had a pure intuition. I could build a building based on this idea, and I could project it out over the waterfall. And nobody had ever done that before. So he started with an imagination, and he had to borrow the idea of cantilever from the waiter or the waitress, but he did it beautifully, and the building he did is really celebrated. So I want you to Google, when you go home, go Google Falling Water, by Frank Lloyd Wright. It's an amazing building. So anyway, this idea, you could say, but he was working in a certain sense out of pure intuition. So the 4th level is conceptual thinking without starting from a percept. If I start from something that's already existing, the concept is already determined. But if I start from the imagination or from the idea itself, without that there isn't a percept yet, then the pure intuition becomes, the intuitive power of thinking becomes the driving force. So the pure thinking or practical reason is what this level is called. Right? My capacity to innovate, my capacity to reason, my capacity to think without a percept, that becomes the power, the motive power. So at this level, the conceptual intuition, or the moral insight based on pure intuition, is the motive. And at this level, that's the third step of thinking and forming mental pictures comes to be the realization of individual moral aims grasped purely intuitively. The realization of individual moral aims grasped purely intuitively. Now I can give you what my answer sheet is if you don't want to write all this down. But not that my answer sheet is better than yours, but we could compare notes this way. So friends, at the 4th level, we're not starting from something which exists. We're not starting from a mental picture. We're not starting from a percept. We're thinking purely. The intuition itself is informing what we will do. Now friends, we have all acted out of pure intuition before. And part of your assignment, the 3rd part of your assignment, in addition to the assignment for Chapter 3 and the assignment for Chapter 9, which we've just completed, thank you very much, is to write a brief paragraph or a few sentences describing when did I act out of pure intuition? When did I make it? When did I innovate? When did I decide to do something out of myself, not out of the situation? The situation itself and what I've seen other people do, or how I can figure out what to do given the situation, often determines what we do. But given a situation where I have a free palette and, in anything I wish, what do I place into that blank space? What is my intuition? What do I love to do? See, at that point, the love for the idea becomes the motive power and the motive. My wanting to give birth to this idea because I love it, that becomes the driving power and the motive. I choose the motive that I love, and I perform it because loving it into existence is the greatest joy I could possibly have. So I want you to reflect on your life and note the moments, because Rudolf Steiner is going to tell us as we go further that only the moments that when we act out of pure moral intuition are we actually free. And those are the most meaningful things that we have done with our entire life. So think about what you'd like on your your gravestone. Would you like what you could have at the level of perceiving and the level of feeling? This person just did it. This person just did it. Okay, just did what? Not a whole lot to say. Yeah. They just lived their life instinctively, or they let their feelings guide them. That's not bad. Okay, that's good. Or this person was a good soldier. They did exactly what a soldier is supposed to do. This person was a good firefighter. This person did their duty, because the duty comes kind of into the mental picture of what that task is. This person was a good Waldorf teacher. That's great, to be a good Waldorf teacher. To be a good firefighter, to be a save lives, to be a good nurse or a good doctor. Hallelujah. But you're not free, necessarily. That in itself, that category isn't making you free. The question is, within that framework, what did you do that was innovative? What did you do that you loved? What did you do that was different than anybody else ever did? Yeah. Because those are the most meaningful things that we give to society. And they're the most meaningful things when we reflect upon our life after death. Those events stand out head and shoulders above everything else that we did, because those were the true pictures of who we are. So this is where we're going with the idea of freedom. When we act out of pure intuition, without referring to the context, if we let the context decide, you walk into a classroom, there's kids fighting in that corner, there's a mess over here, somebody has spilled water here. You walk into the classroom and you say, okay, I knew that so-and-so shouted at the kids, so I'm going to shout at the top of my lungs. That doesn't work. And so I pick up the recorder and I start to play it. That may or may not work. What am I going to do in that situation? So you can refer to all the different examples of people you know and say, well, what would so-and-so do? What would so-and-so do? What would this Waldorf teacher do? But it may be that none of those situations are actually what you want to do. And you may come into a situation like that, and the stage is set, that something needs to happen. But what you do is completely, nobody would ever imagine that you would ever do it. Yeah? That you would do it, and in fact, you didn't even imagine that you would do it until the moment, and all of a sudden you do something, and it completely changes the mood in the room. Now you did it because you loved it. You could say the context, you could have done a number of things, yes? But what you did, nobody had ever done before, you'd never done before, and the beauty of it was you loved it, and hopefully it worked. Yeah? It may have failed too. But the thing is that you did it because you loved it. You see the situation? So we're not doing what we should do, we're doing what we love to do. Now isn't that egoism? Not in the strictest sense, because egoism is the repeating of an action that we've done before. But I've never done this before. I'm going to try it. Yeah, I love it. I'm going to give it a go. So in that moment, friends, the possibility of freedom arises. We have to celebrate that moment. So I'd like you to review your life. We'll stop here and take a lunch break and think about those moments in your life when you did something free. We'll have a brief talk about that when we come back, okay? Any questions? Thank you, friends. What is a moral intuition? Yeah. The word moral, remember, means what we do in this context. So a moral intuition would be an idea of what I can do, wouldn't it? A moral intuition would be an idea of an action that I can do. It's an inner idea. It doesn't arise from the context. It arises from within. It's an intuition. It arises from within, but it's an idea of an action I could perform. Now, so he says, such an action presupposes the capacity for moral intuition. Whoever lacks the capacity to experience the particular ethical principle of each individual case will never achieve truly individual will. The exact opposite of this ethical principle is that of Kant. Kant says, act in such a way that the basis of your action are applicable, your bases of your actions are applicable to all human beings. In other words, act as everybody else would act, who is moral in the world. This sentence is the death of all individual impulses of action.
Yeah.
My standard cannot be how all humans would act, but rather what I am to do in the individual case. What will I contribute? Yeah. A superficial judgment might perhaps object to these arguments by asking, how can an action be formed individually for each particular case in a particular situation and yet simultaneously be determined purely conceptually out of intuition? This objection rests on confusing the ethical motive with the perceptual content of the action. The perceptual content of the action is what happens to the action when I perform it. You can see me doing something, that's the perceptual content of the action. But the ethical motive is what you don't see. Why did I do that? What was my idea? That's the question we have to keep asking. What was this person thinking when they did that? But more importantly, what am I thinking when I'm doing this? Yeah? So the perceptual content of action can be a motive in the case of the progress of civilization or egotistic actions. But in actions based purely on ethical intuition, the cognitive content of the action, the perceptual content of the action, is not the motive. Naturally, my eye directs its gaze toward the perceptual content, but the eye does not allow itself to be determined by the perceptual content of the action being the result. Okay? If I'm concerned with the result of what I'm doing, I'm not looking at what I'm doing, I'm looking at what's going to happen when I have completed it. In a certain sense, I'm overlooking the very fact of the joy of birthing the idea. So I'm more interested in how is the world going to receive this, or is it going to work or not. So that, in a certain sense, I'm looking at the perceptual content of the action to say, well, no, I don't think it's going to work, therefore I'm not going to bother to even try it. But it might work, you see, but I'm not going to take the chance. So if I talk myself out of giving birth to the idea, then I'll never know whether it would work or not because I haven't loved it enough. Now, so he says, in actions based on purely ethical intuition is not the motive. Naturally, my eye directs its gaze toward the perceptual content, but myself, my eye does not allow itself to be determined by it. The content is used only to form a cognitive concept for oneself. The corresponding moral concept is not derived by the eye from the object. The cognitive concept of a particular situation that I encounter is also a moral concept, only when I come from the standpoint of a particular moral principle. If I wanted to base all of my actions on the moral evolution of civilization, I would have fixed marching orders. From every event that I perceive and that can possibly concern me, an ethical duty immediately arises, namely to do my part so that the event in question serves the evolution of civilization. In addition to the concept which reveals to me the context of an event or thing in natural law, the event or thing also has an ethical label with instructions addressed to me, the moral being, about how I should behave, what I should do. Such a moral label is legitimate in its sphere, but on a higher level it corresponds with the idea that reveals itself to me when I face a concrete situation. Now friends, what he's just introduced here subtly, it's easy to kind of just read right past it. What's the difference between a cognitive concept and a moral concept? Okay, we need to add another word up here. So, given a percept, on the axis of a cognition, the concept that arises in response to a percept, which has already been determined by the percept, is the cognitive concept. Right? So if I'm giving, something happens in the room and I have a percept and I cognize, oh, the idea of that percept is this, the concept of that is this, I have cognized the concept that belongs to the given percept. The percept is given to observation. My task in cognition is to find the corresponding concept. The corresponding concept could be called the cognitive concept because we're talking about cognition here. So I'm going to write the word cognitive concept next to concept, okay? This is the cognitive concept, at least in this particular model. The cognitive concept is a concept that cognizes the percept, right? Cognitive concept that corresponds to the percept. Yeah. And that's lawfully determined, right? For cognition, the concept is determined by the percept. The concept of a tree is determined by the percept of a tree. So the cognitive concept is the idea of the tree, yeah, that I'm looking at. Now, but a moral concept, wait a minute, moral concept, what's that? It's an idea of what I'm going to do. Now, he's saying a cognitive concept can become a moral concept if I let the content of what I have cognized determine my action. However, friends, we also have another capacity. In addition to cognition, there's another axis on the board. We started to highlight it here. Do you see this axis?
Mm-hmm.
The sleeping axis, this vertical axis that's connected with our will. So if I choose, I can act instinctively out of my sensing something, that's level 1. I can act out of my feelings without thinking about them, that's level 2. I can act out of my mental pictures and concepts and ideas that I'm perceiving, that's level 3. But at level 4, I must have to be responding to something that's above the line. I'm not dealing with cognition, I'm dealing with another realm. I'm dealing with a form of ideation that is not limited to the perceptual world. I'm dealing with a world of pure intuition up here. Out of the world of pure intuition, there exists also the possibility, you know, I could do this. It's not there. There's nothing, there is no such thing. It doesn't exist. But I could do something that I can imagine. Wow. Hey! You see? Now this is something new. It doesn't exist before. So in addition to the cognitive concept, it's possible that there is also a moral concept. An idea of something that I will do that's not determined by cognition. It's determined rather by pure intuition. So the moral concept has to be preceded by something else. Now here we're going to get esoteric, okay? But just for a moment. But it's not that esoteric because this is your experience, friends. This is directly in your own experience. The moral concept, just like a cognitive concept arises out of cognitive intuition, intuition is also working in this direction. Intuition is working from above into me. You with me? So in the sphere of moral intuition, what's happening is this sphere is also streaming into me. So the moral concept, Rudolf says the first moral concept that arises out of a moral intuition. That is, the world of possible ideas touches into me as a possible action. He says to us, the first moral intuition happens to every human being around the age of 3. What is the first moral intuition? I am. It is a verb. You see? It's not just it's I am. You see, there's an activity, there's an intention there. So I am is what the experience really is. The child begins to realize, not only am I an I, but I have something to do here. And Dad, I want to do what I want to do. Okay. So that's the will part of it, you see? Because the I is filled with will. It's filled with intention. So when we have an idea of what we want to do, The first step of that, it happens around 3, and since that happens, for the first moral intuition, the moral concept, I am, begins, I am is followed by a series of dots. Yeah? And we won't know the end of this answer until we get to the end of life. I am going to do this, and 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 this is the fruit of my life. Yeah? At the end of our life, we can look back and take stock. So how much of this potential that I was bringing fresh out of the spiritual world have I actually accomplished? That's the fruit of my life. What have I done with my life, you see? Not how many times did I jump through the proper hoops and do the right thing. Those are important for society. But there's no originality there. You know, I can be a good soldier. But wouldn't it be better to be a great soldier? Wouldn't it be a good soldier? Wouldn't it be better to be a great human being?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better to be original about something? In addition to that, sure, be a good soldier, but be a great human being. Be who you are. So this moral concept, this moral intuition, so I am is the first, it's the beginning of all other moral concepts. And it arises not from the context of the perceptible world. There is no cognitive percept for the I. Scientists have sought in vain to weigh the body at death to try to notice what happens at the moment of death when the spirit leaves the body. What have they found? There's barely any change. So if you're putting a person who's dying on the scale and you're waiting till the moment of death occurs, there's a subtle, maybe a subtle shift, hardly any at all. It might have to do just with how much air is being taken in and taken out, because the first breath is an inhaling, and the last breath has to be an expiration. Yes, you expire, you breathe out. So there may be a subtle shift of weight, but they're saying, you know what, the spirit doesn't weigh anything. Therefore, you can't measure it. But so we could say, but no, the content of the moral content of one's life is something which is not perceptible it's not a percept, it's actually, it lives in the intuitive sphere. I am, there's nothing, I mean, my body allows me to reflect on my existence, but if I think that I'm my body, my eye is really in poor condition, because my body is getting older by the moment. So if I think that I am my body, I'm really mistaken. In fact, that's one of the great joys of getting older, and one of the great sorrows too. And when we're young, we think we are our body, and gradually we realize, boy, my body is going down the tubes, but I feel actually younger and fresher in my spirit. Yeah? And so as the body deteriorates, the spirit actually is liberated from the body. So the body, remember, the body allows us to cognize that we're an individual, but we can't. But there's nothing perceptible to the I. The I is, when you say I, you are saying that not out of the fact that this body is speaking, you're saying it out of a pure idea. Each of you has a pure intuitive experience that you refer to as I. If we're honest about it, friends, when we say I, we should say it with tremendous reverence, not because we're reverent to ourselves, but because there's something bigger than we are that's coming to birth in us. We're not yet that full self. We're just a little bit of it. But we're trying to become more and more ourself. We're trying to birth more and more of this. So the birthing of ourself is happening through moral intuition and through forming a moral concept of how I will rearrange the world as an unreasonable man or as a free individual. I will rearrange the world in accordance with who I am, because it is my joy to do so, because my spirit wants to realize itself through performing actions of freedom and love. Do we get it? Mm-hmm. So now we begin to see, this is the picture. The I is at the apex of this cross. On the one hand, we're cognizing, and on the other hand, we're intuiting, completely intuiting, something of our spiritual nature that is yet unfinished. I haven't lived here all my life, yet. But I still have tons of things I want to do, friends. Don't you? Don't you have a long bucket list? Not even a bucket list. I don't even consider a bucket list. It's just, I don't care how long I live, I'm never going to finish, you know. So there's tons of things I want to do. See, those ideas that live within us, that's the fruit of our spiritual activity. Those intuitions, those ideas. Don't you want to realize them? Don't you want to make them happen? So you experience them is through moral intuition, and you form a moral concept of them, and you say, boy, I hope I get a chance to do that, because that's really why I'm here. The rest of the stuff is paying the rent, but this is what I'm here to do, you see? And the people that we recognize are the people who become aware of that and rise up out of themselves and say, this is who I am. And that's a free human being at that moment. So we need therefore to consider the cognitive concept as the concept that corresponds to the percept which is given. But the moral concept actually arises directly as an idea of something I could do that I've never done before. Yeah? If I've done it before, I can refer back to the cognitive effect of what I did and reread it and look at it again and do it again. But if I've never done it before, it's original. You see? It's a new idea. Now, people vary, bottom of page 149, people vary in their capacity for intuition. For one person, ideas just bubble up, while another achieves them by much labor. The situations in which people live and which serves as the scene of their activity are no less varied. How I will act, therefore, depends on how my capacity for intuition works in relation to a particular situation. The sum of ideas acted within us, the real content of our intuitions, constitutes what is individual in us, notwithstanding the universality of the world of ideas. To the extent that the intuitive content turns into action, here we go, friends, the degree to which I bring these ideas to birth through deeds that I perform, through actions that I perform, it is the ethical content of the individual. What I actually have done is the ethical content of my life. Yeah? Allowing this intuitive content to live itself out fully is the highest driving force of morality. At the same time, it is the highest motive of those who realize that in the end, all other moral principles unite within it. We call the standpoint ethical individualism. A person who is true to their true nature, true to their intuitions, and acts according to who they are, is an ethical individual. Not ethical in the sense of the culture, which may in fact condemn what they're doing. In fact, they might be considered to be criminal in context of a given situation. But a person who is ethical in the true sense of the word is they are abiding by their own spirit and delivering what they consider to be the highest ideal in their deeds. They're performing the essence of who they really are. Yeah. So ethical individualism. So all of a sudden on the next page the word love starts to appear. Wait a minute, what's love got to do with this? It's got to do everything with it. Yeah. So while I'm acting, the bottom of 29, top of 30, while I'm acting, an ethical principle moves me to the extent that it can live with me intuitively. It is united with love for the goal that I wish to realize through my action. I do not consult any person, or I do not consult any code with the question, should I perform this action? If I do so, friends, if I've got a great idea and I call my friend, I just had a great idea, this is what it is, should I do it or not? I just gave away authorship of the action to their advice. Yeah. See, if I take their advice, I'm not really the author of the action because I asked their permission. Do you approve or do you disapprove? If I let their decision, if I let their advice influence my action, I've given away something that actually lived within me directly. Yeah? Now, it doesn't mean we want to be foolish, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't search for mentorship or advice. But at the same time, we could say ultimately, to do what lives within us is the highest ideal. To do it because it is who we are. We don't need somebody to shore us up. ultimately. When we know, when we are intuitively in touch with our true spirit, we act directly out of our spirit. We don't have to ask somebody else for their support or to give their approval or recommendation. We do it because we love it. We do it because it's who we are. We do it because it's the right thing for us at the moment. Not the right thing for us in any selfish, egotistical way, but the right thing because this is who I really am. And of course that will not be filled with vengeance, it will not be filled with anger, it will be filled with love and creativity. It will be filled with the true intuitive experience, because the same place out of which we have the experience of I, which nestles into us around the age of 3, that same place where the I kind of came from is a whole host of other possibilities that are waiting for us to bring them into realization. The first moral intuition is I am. After that, there's lots more possibly waiting, but we have to reach up and pull them down. See? But we don't ask somebody's permission to do that. We do it because we love it. We do it because who we are. Now this is, friends, if you think about this, this is terrifying. It's terrifying to the individual doing it, unless they actually experience the intuition. And believe me, this is completely threatening to the well-being of every society. Free individuals are not usually welcome. Let's face it. They're considered outrageous, they're shunted to the side, they're punished, they're persecuted, sometimes they're killed, and afterwards we look back and say, boy, they were remarkable, you know, but I'm glad they're out of the way. But you see, that's the weird thing. So on the one hand, this is a threat to an establishment. On the other hand, this will actually set up a whole new pattern around which an establishment will grow and will have to be shattered by the next free being. Yeah, so all progress depends on the unreasonable man. All progress depends upon individuals who have the courage to be themselves and to act out of themselves. They will establish a new order that will then have to be shattered by the next individual who's going to bring a new world order about. You see what I'm saying? So in fact, friends, you could say there are untold gifts that every one of us has. And as a teacher and as an individual, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for what are the potentials lying within this child, and how can I help this child develop their capacities so they can become who they're going to be. Every teacher should have as their goal, I want this child to have the possibility to become who they are. Every parent and every teacher, that should be the ideal. I want this child to take hold and become who they are. Not to do what I tell them to do, but to do what lives within them. Yeah? Now that's scary to an established society. It says, no, they've got to pay their bills and they've got to pay taxes. And no, well, that's okay, maybe, but in addition to that, yeah. So this is a bit outrageous. Yeah? I do not consult any person or code with the question, should I perform this action? I perform the action as soon as I grasp the idea. Only in this way is it my action. Top of page 151. The actions of those who act only because they recognize particular ethical norms results from principles present in their moral code. They are mere executors, a higher form of robot. Toss the opportunity, he's being outrageous here, but he's saying the truth, he's speaking the truth. Toss an opportunity to act in their awareness, and right away the clockwork of their moral principles sets itself in motion and runs its course in a lawful fashion to produce a Christian, humane, or apparently selfless action, or one for the sake of the progress of civilization. What an outrageous, insulting thing to say. But he's absolutely right, isn't he? You know very well if you introduce a bill into Congress, you know exactly before you even introduce it what's going to happen to it. Yeah? Because all those congressmen are defending their turf and having to deal with all kind of pressures, and it's exactly predictable what's going to happen to that bill. Yeah? Congress is at a stalemate. It's terrible. Dreadful. But you could say they're all, in a certain sense, who in Congress is going to have the courage to stand up and be authentic? That's what we keep hoping for. Who's going to be the hero? Who's going to stand up and say, you know what? I'm not going to operate out of this anymore. I'm going to act out of this. And a person who does so galvanizes the Congress, but actually, begins to rally, either support or devastation, whatever, depending on the situation. Yeah. So only when I follow love, not love for an object, but love for an objective, is it I myself who act. At this level of morality, I do not act because I acknowledge a Lord over me, or I do not acknowledge an external authority, or I do not acknowledge a so-called inner voice. A so-called inner voice that in fact is just the voice of the other authorities continuing to haunt me, yeah, in my worst nightmares. Yeah. I'm not following those voices, I'm acting out of myself, see? So, I have found within myself the basis of my acting, love for the action. I do not check rationally whether the action is good or evil. Now here, whoa, wait a minute, Steiner. No, you can't do this. You can't, what? No, you can't do this. This is no. This is terrible, right? But here's what he says, I do not check rationally whether the action is good or evil. Whoa. This is complete revolution, yes? What do you call a person who acts without any, does a society of people that has no authority? No.
Amoral? Is somebody who's amoral?
Yeah, no, there's anarchy. This is anarchy, you see? I'm not concerned with whether what I'm going to do is good or evil. I do it because I love it. That's anarchy, yeah? And yes, it is. And yet, it's anarchy based on the ethical stance of the individual who's performing the action. If they are really being true to themselves, what they do will be good. Because they are good in their true nature. They're not good because they're abiding by other principles. They're good because they're intuiting the source of themselves and continuing to burst it into existence. You see? This is remarkable. In other words, a society of free individuals would be an outrageously creative group of people innovating and doing things that break all the rules, and somehow progress happens more quickly. Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't you like to see Congress? A group of creative people intuiting ideas and acting them out? Wow! Wouldn't that be lovely instead of the stalemate that we have?
But what about acts of violence and criminal acts?
Well, acts of violence do not arise through moral intuition. You see, they act out of the lower levels. Violence and criminality come out of either instinctive life or out of the habitual feeling life or out of egoism. I will get a certain pleasure if I do this, or I will get power if I do this, or I will get control, or I'll get revenge. So all those things are not coming out of the moral intuition, they're coming out of the first or second or third level.
A conscious act based on a mental picture.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right, based on a mental picture.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So if I don't have a mental picture, there's no mental picture if I've never done it before. Yeah. I don't have a mental picture of the pleasure I'm going to receive or the pain I'm going to suffer. And I'm not concerned, ultimately, because what moves me to act is my love for the idea, my love for the action. If I love what I'm doing, and I'm being correct, and if I'm intuiting correctly, it will be good. So that's what he says. Yeah? My action becomes, I do it because I love it. I do not check rationally whether the action is good or evil. I do it because I love it. Bottom of 151. My action becomes, quote, good, unquote, if my intuition steeped in love stands in the right way in the intuitively experienceable world continuum. It becomes, quote, bad, unquote, if that is not the case. I do not ask myself, how would another person act in my situation? Rather, I act as I, this particular individuality, want or will. What directs me is not common usage, not general custom, not a universal human principle, and not an ethical norm, but my love for the deed, my love for the doing of it. That's my motive. I do it because it's who I am. I feel no compulsion, neither the compulsion of nature, which guides me in my drives, nor the compulsion of ethical commandments. I simply want to carry out what lies within me. Wow. This is anarchy, isn't it? But it's anarchy at the highest level. It's authentic anarchy. That every person, in fact, is a world unto themselves but they're all, you see, the point he's going to bring is we're all drawing our intuitions from the same spiritual realm. See? So the intuitions that I am drawing and the intuitions that you are drawing will be different. But if we're all drawing them from the same spiritual realm, they won't be in conflict with each other. See? Because we're drawing them all ethically from the same source. We're drawing them individually, but we're drawing them out of a continuum of possibilities which is infinite, which is all of which are in alignment. We'll come back to this question, yeah? We won't actually, free human beings do not come into conflict with each other. Isn't that outrageous? Free human beings aren't in conflict because free human beings are drawing upon their true nature from the spiritual world in different parts of the world, but they're drawing on the authenticity. Therefore, because they're drawing from the same spiritual source, what they will do will only come into conflict if they begin to argue about some definition or something lower than it. But true free human beings don't come into conflict with each other. In this way, a community of free individuals becomes possible.
So we flow in and out then from freedom to not free.
Yes, we do.
Realistically, because we're on this earth.
Yes.
Right. So sometimes we're able to act from that higher space and receive that intuition and act purely, if you will, from the love.
Yes.
And then there are times when we have to pay our bills and we want them all to work together.
Of course.
But that's because we do have conflicts. We have conflicts with our children, and they want to be free, and we want to be free. And okay.
So we may be arguing about what space, you know. I want to be free to sleep, and you want to be free to have your party. Well, where you got a problem? So, but in truth, so yes, exactly right. Rudolf Steiner will go on to say, all of our actions are not free. Our actions are partly free and partly unfree. That's what we're honest about. A free human being can't be free in everything they do. They still have certain obligations. They have to live in a body. They have to deal with the society in which they're living. They have to abide by certain rules, you know. But you could say, in addition to all the rules and regulations that regulate our body and our instinctive life and our feelings and our cultural setting, in addition to that, we can bring to birth something which is individual and be free within that. You see, and that's what we respect. And friends, the other thing about a free person is they're not predictable. One of the freest people that I know is actually my friend Clifford Monks, who for many years worked at Rudolf Steiner College. Clifford Monks is an absolute genius. And I sat in many faculty meetings with Clifford Monks, and whereas all the other members of the faculty, all of whom I revere and love, they would say things, but I could more or less predict what would come out of their mouths. But Clifford would always say something, or always come up with an idea, just left me absolutely stunned. Where did that come from? That's absolutely genius. Where did he get that? You see, he had the capacity, he's still alive, he has an incredible capacity for moral intuition. And he is a complete original. There's nobody else like him. And this is really what we revere, friends. We revere people who are actually authentic, who have original ideas and bring them to the table, and you say, my gosh, where did that come from? That's the most amazing thing. And I could never have predicted that you would have thought that or said that, you see? Not predictable. The predictable part is all the characterological disposition stuff. We know that. We can we can temperament and gender and all that. There's some things that are predictable, but there's some things, boy, a free individual, they blow you away every time. They're absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
So what if some people don't like that unpredictability?
Well,
they want to know, well, why are you thinking that, or why did you do that? And you're like, well, because it was there, and
exactly.
it was right, and they're,
Yeah, that's right.
So how is it not impulsive,
Well, this is also why it's very difficult to gauge another person's individuality and freedom. But you could say, if they could trace it back, you say, well, I just felt like it, or I just felt, or it just came, I was imitating somebody else, or, there's lots of things, or I was abiding by this rule, or I found a flaw in the rule and I'm tweaking it. All those are situations that we could more or less characterize as coming out of the characterological disposition. But there are some things you could say, you just can't put, this is this is off the chart, you know. This particular behavior, this particular idea, it wasn't anywhere on the horizon of anything that anybody could ever have predicted. But here it is, and God bless you, this is incredible what you brought, you see? Or curse you, because, you know, I mean, people felt about Mozart, you know, how could he possibly write that music? How could Mozart, just, you know, while his wife is giving birth to a child, he's writing a symphony in the waiting room, you know, with perfectly, all the parts in perfect order, not a mistake. You never even have to go back and correct a single note that he wrote. How could he do that? You see? He had this incredible capacity for pure intuition. He could intuit and imagine and create without a flaw. There's something angelic about that, to be honest with you. Remember, angels don't make any mistakes. Neither did Mozart. Now, Beethoven, you know, I've heard, I haven't seen his pages, but apparently Beethoven would wrestle over a score, and his score looked with these smudges of ink all over the place, and he's wrestling with, you know, he's scratching through a line and re-correcting it and correcting it and correcting it, and you just feel like he's wrestling with the devil with every phrase to get it exactly the way he wants it to be. But he's working and working and working as well. Mozart could just pluck it out of the spirit and world and deliver it perfectly. Wow. Yeah. You admire both of them. Yeah. So it's this incredible capacity for intuition. The spirit lives, you see. The spirit is filled with possibility that we can only dream about. Yeah. Yeah. Who could ever imagine a Mozart or even a Beethoven? How could you possibly imagine? But when one appears, you say, oh my gosh, incredible, yeah? So we begin to see that these are people who are examples of living out of their moral intuition, yeah? And in fact, friends, people who act out of their moral intuition, they are the great heroes of human culture. The people who act authentically are the ones that we respect and revere, because they have actually given humanity an example of what all of us can aspire to become. All of us have the potential to become free and creative, but only a few of us get to do so, or will rise to the occasion to do so in any given life. Now, so here, when we have to, I don't want to again overdo this, but he says, defenders, at top of 152, defenders of universal ethical norms might object to these arguments as follows. If people merely strive to express themselves and do as they please, then there is no difference between a good action and a crime. Every bit of knavery within me has equal claim to expression with the intention to serve the universal good. As an ethical human being, what should be decisive in me is not the mere fact that I focus on the idea of an action, but rather my determination of whether the action is good or evil. Only if I've determined that the action is good should I carry it out. Steiner's response, he says, my response to this objection, which seems plausible but arises only from a misunderstanding of what is meant here, is this. Anyone who wants to know the essence of human willing must distinguish between the path that brings willing up to a certain stage of development and the special form that willing assumes when it nears its goal. On the path to this goal, norms play their justifiable role. The goal of the will consists in realizing ethical aims that are grasped purely intuitively. Humans achieve such aims to the degree that they possess any capacity to lift themselves to the intuitive conceptual content of the world. In any individual act of willing, other things are generally mixed in with such aims as motive or more motive power. But intuition can still determine or co-determine human willing. What we should do, we do. We pay the rent, we raise the family, we pay the bills, we take care of society. What we should do, we do. Yeah? We have to, because we live in a context where there are certain requirements. Yeah? But we offer the stage upon which should becomes do. An action is our own if we allow it to emerge as such from within ourselves. Here the impulse can only be completely individual. In truth, only an act of will emerging from intuition can be individual. Wow. Only an act of will derived from moral intuition is individual. Only if blind drives are reckoned to belong to the human individuality can we see a criminal deed or evil as an expression of individuality, equivalent to the incarnation of pure intuition. The blind drive that drives someone to commit a crime does not come from intuition. It belongs to what is individual within it does not belong to what is individual within a person. It belongs to what is commonest, to what is equally present in all individuals, and out of which we must work our way with our individuality. What is individual in me is not my organism with its drives and feelings and passions and desires and lusts and all the other stuff that goes with it. That's not individual in me, that's common to all of us. We all have those things, yeah? That's common to all of us. But what is individual in is not my organism with all its drives and feelings, but my world of ideas, my own world of ideas that lights up within this organism. Yeah? My drives, instincts, and passions establish no more in me than I belong to the general species human being. Yeah? I have passions and desires. Guess what? I'm a human being. But the fact that something conceptual expresses itself in a special way in those drives, passions, and feelings establishes my individuality. Through my instincts and drives, I am the kind of person of whom there are 12 to a dozen. But I am an individual by means of the particular form of the idea by which I, within the dozen, designate myself as I. The idea by which I designate myself as I. Only a being other than myself could distinguish me from others by differences in my animal nature. I distinguish myself from others by my thinking, that is, by actively grasping what expresses itself in my organism as conceptuality. Thus we cannot say that the action of a criminal proceeds from an idea. In fact, what is characteristic of criminal acts is precisely that criminal acts derive from non-conceptual or non-ideal elements within the human being. They originate within passions and lust and egoism. They certainly don't derive from moral intuition. Yeah? Insofar as an action proceeds from the conceptual part of my individual being, it is felt to be free. Every other portion of an action, whether it's performed under the compulsion of nature or according to the requirement of an ethical norm, is felt to be unfree. I don't feel free when I have to pay taxes. Although I do know somebody who actually kind of enjoys it. God bless them, yeah? It's good. I mean, I admire a person who can enjoy paying taxes because they say, yes, this is going to help this and this and this and this. Great. Yeah. But I have to pay taxes, you know. If you gave me a choice, I might choose to pay taxes. I may not, but we have to pay taxes as a requirement. But to do something because we love it, you know, it goes beyond what I have to do. So I feel unfree when I'm told what I have to do and what not to do. But I feel free when I have an idea and I give myself permission, or I activate the doing of it. Humans are free to the extent that they're able to obey themselves at each instant of their lives. An ethical deed is only my deed if it can be called a free deed in this sense. To act out of freedom does not exclude moral laws, but rather includes them. Still, acting out of freedom stands on a higher level than acting dictated by moral laws alone. Why should my actions serve the welfare of the whole any less if I've acted out of love for the deed than if I've acted only because I feel a duty to serve the welfare of the whole? The simple concept of duty excludes freedom, because duty does not recognize individuality but demands subjection of individuality to a general norm. Freedom of action is unthinkable from the standpoint. Freedom of action is thinkable only from the standpoint of ethical individualism. So here we go. How is it possible for humans to live together socially if everyone's striving merely to express his or her own individuality? You got a bunch of crazy people all doing their own thing, running red lights and running over each other and not paying bills and chaos and anarchy, ruination of humanity. So, So this objection is characteristic of misguided moralism, which imagines that a society of human beings is only possible if they're all united by a commonly determined ethical order. Such moralism fails to understand the unity the unity of the world of ideas. Here we are. It cannot conceive that the world of ideas that is active in me is none other than the world of ideas that is at work in my neighbor. Yeah? To be sure, this unity is merely the result of my experience in the world, but it must be so. If it were to be recognized in any way other than observation, general laws rather than individual experience would give the stamp of validity in that realm. Individuality is possible only if each individual being knows another being by individual observation alone. The difference between me and my neighbor, friends, consists not in our living in two completely different, distinct spiritual worlds, but in my neighbor's receiving intuitions other than my own from the world of ideas common to us both. Isn't this beautiful? My neighbors want to live out their intuitions, and I want to live out my intuitions. If we really all draw from the idea and follow no external physical impulse or no external spiritual impulse. Now we can understand an external physical impulse, right? Mm-hmm. Someone forces us to act a particular way. Yeah. But what is an external spiritual impulse? I don't know if we talked about the adversarial beings. Yeah. Spiritual beings who would tempt us, who would try to push our own intuitions aside and corrupt us by filling us with an idea that really is not our own idea. It's a corruption of our nature. Yeah? The Luciferic and the Ahrimanic spirits, for example, they try to distract us from living our moral intuitions, and rather they try to work at a lower level of our consciousness to appeal rather to something which is not our true nature, not our true spiritual nature. So an external spiritual cause would be an adversarial being who is trying to corrupt my true intuition. Yeah, just like an external physical source would be somebody who is trying to prevent me from doing what I actually want to do. Yeah. So, if we really all draw from the idea and follow no external physical or spiritual impulses, then we cannot but meet in the same striving and the same intentions. An ethical misunderstanding, a clash, is impossible among ethically free human beings. Here it is. Only someone who is ethically unfree, who obeys natural drives or the conventional demands of duty, will thrust aside someone else who does not follow the same instincts and demands. To live in love of action and to let live in the understanding of the other's will is the fundamental maxim of free human beings. Bottom of 155, circle that, please. You will come back to that. That is one of the most famous quotes given, referred to as Rudolf Steiner's contribution. Yes. To live in love of action and to let live in understanding of the other's will is the fundamental maxim of free human beings. Live and let live. Yeah?
Even if the other's actions are immoral, like criminal or...
Yes, that's right. But yes. But to live in love of action and to let live in the understanding of the other's will would be to say that I understand where another person is coming from. I understand whether they're coming out of their moral intuitions, and I also understand if they're coming out of something else. They might be coming out of other impulses, yeah. But of course, I'm only going to clash with them as a free human being if they're in fact doing something which is destructive or corrupt. Yeah. But I can recognize if I'm really aspiring, that is, friends, this is a beautiful thing. Free human beings recognize each other. They may be completely doing different things, but they say, you're doing really well. Keep it up. You're not doing what I would do, but that's because you're you and I'm me. But I admire you for doing for being who you are. You're doing a great job. Keep it up, you see. So we free human beings actually recognize each other. They recognize the striving of another person to be ethical, to be true to themselves. And what greater recognition could you be Could you give to another person and say, I see you, and I admire what you're doing. I fully support you. I love you. Yeah. Keep going. You're doing great. Yeah. You got it. Yeah. You're on. So it's not jealousy, it's not American Idol, it's not fighting for the top dog. It's the recognition of one human being. I see your genius. Shine it on, please. Yeah. You're doing a great job. See, that's what we want from culture. We want a culture where we recognize each other's individuality and we support each other's individuality. We're not competing for anything. We're only trying to give the very best that we have to give to the world, you see. We don't have to compete with each other to do that. We just have to aspire and to encourage each other to go for it. Yeah? And to give each other space as well. Yeah. So, if the basic source of compatibility did not lie within human nature, we could not implant the idea of compatibility by any outward laws. You see, if human beings did not inherently have the capacity to recognize and to love each other as free, we could never force a group of people to get along or even to live in the same community. Why do people keep choosing to live in community with each other? Because there is inherent in every human being, we're all drawing our ideals from the same source. We're not the same being, we're each individuals, but our ideas are all coming from the same place. And when we recognize a person who is embodying those ideals and see that those ideals are drawn from that source, we admire and love the person for it. So we love each other, not because we're forced to by the laws of nature. You have to get along now, so live here together and we're going to kind of make sure that you're getting along, because if you're not getting along, we're going to throw you, we're going to punish you for not getting along. If that had to be the situation, the whole human condition would be terrible, friends. In fact, you begin to feel that that's somehow our attitude. If you're not getting along, you're doing something wrong. But then you begin to say, why aren't we getting along? What is it? Why are there conflicts in the world? Usually there are conflicts because there are repressions or acts of vengeance or acts of hostility or fundamental polar points of view at the level of the sensation or the level of the feeling or the level of the particular idea that you think you're supposed to live by, and therefore everybody else has to do it too. Yeah. If we really recognize the individual, it doesn't matter what religion, what gender, what belief system, what sexual orientation. None of that matters. What matters is an individual recognizes the other individual as being authentic. It's not what binds us together in our commonality. It's what gives us our distinction as an individuality that we love. See? So we don't love each other because we're the same, because we're not. We love each other because we recognize the spirit living within each other and say, great going, I admire you. You're incredible. Do you see it? So we can't force that on somebody, but we can hope that humanity will stop fighting with each other and begin to lift their consciousness to what really is living in us as individuals. It's only at that level that we're really going to save the world. And I don't care who the policemen are, whether it's America or Rome or somebody else who's going around trying to force people to get along, or to force democracy or capitalism on them or whatever other ocracy it may be. It's not going to work. You can't force it on a human being. You can only hope that human beings will recognize each other. But you can educate, you can sensitize, we can develop the arts, we can try to develop something where where we appreciate the human condition and celebrate it. To celebrate the individual who's doing the good. Not because it's good, because other people consider it good, but because we recognize, wow, amazing. So, a free person lives in trust that the other free person belongs to the same spiritual world and that they will concur with each other in their intentions. Those who are free demand no agreement from their fellows, but they expect agreement because it is inherent in human nature. This is not meant to indicate the necessity of this or that outer arrangement. Rather, it is meant to indicate the attitude of soul the state of soul which a human being experiencing himself or herself amidst esteemed fellow human beings can best do justice to human dignity. Now Steiner goes on to say, there are some who will say the concept of the free human being you sketch is a chimera. It doesn't exist. You just made this up. There's no such thing as a free human being, Steiner. You're completely wrong. You just invented this. This is just inherent philosophy. He says, so we have to deal with real people, and the only morality to hope for is in them comes when human beings obey an ethical commandment and when they formulate their ethical task as duty and do not freely follow their inclinations in love. Steiner says, okay, I see what you're saying. I don't doubt what you're saying at the level you're talking about. Only a blind man could. But if this is supposed to be the final insight about humanity, then away with all this hypocrisy about, quote, ethics, unquote. You should then simply say that as long as human nature is not free, it must be forced to act. From a certain standpoint, it is irrelevant whether unfreedom is enforced through physical means or through moral laws, whether human beings are free because they obey their limitless sexual drive or because they are enchained by conventional morality. But let us not claim that people who can correctly call their actions their own if they are driven to them by a power other than themselves. Still, right in the midst of compulsion, certain human beings lift themselves up, free spirits who in the welter of custom, legal stricture, religious practice, and so forth, find themselves, their authentic self. They are free to the extent that they obey only themselves. They are unfree to the extent they subjected themselves to something else. Who of us can say that we are really free in all our actions? But in each of us there dwells a deeper being in whom the free human comes to expression. Our life is made up of free and unfree actions, yet we cannot think the concept of the human being through to the end without arriving at the free spirit as the purest expression of human nature. Indeed, we are only truly human to the extent that we are free. Wow! We're only truly human to the extent that we're free. That doesn't mean free from oppression. That means free in terms of living what lives within us to the fullest extent. Living from oppression would be an unnecessary prerequisite to that, or at least would be helpful. This is an ideal, many will say, no doubt, but it is an ideal that works as a real element in our being and manifests its effects to the surface. Were human beings merely natural creatures, it would be absurd to look for ideals, that is, ideas that are not currently effective in requiring realization. For things of the external world, the idea is determined by the percept, and we've done our part once we've recognized the connection between the idea and the percept. But this is not so with the human beings. The totality of human existence is not determined apart from human beings themselves. Their true concepts as ethical human beings, free spirit, are not united in advance objectively with a perceptual picture of human beings needed to be confirmed afterward by cognition. As human beings, we must each unite our own concept with the percept of human through our activities. What he's saying, friends, is we are not yet there. See? We're on the way to manifesting in our deeds what is truly human. We're not doing it yet, but we're on the path, we're on the goal toward that. When we live in our actions to the degree to which what lives within us is expressing itself in our actions, then we can truly be called human beings, because we will be acting out of love and freedom. Now, at the moment, if you look at what's going on in the world, you say a lot of actions don't look very free, they don't look very inspired. In fact, they look mean and disgraceful. Yes, it's absolutely right. But you could say, but human beings are still trying. We're still trying to birth the I. We're still trying to bring our moral intuitions to expression. And if we judge humanity's actions at the current moment, yes, it's depressing. But if we say, yet there are still individuals around the world who have risen up and given birth to their individuality, hallelujah. I wait for the day, or I long for the day when each of us will have the same courage to become who we really are. So he says, in the objective world, the percept and concept are divided by the way we're organized. In cognition, we overcome the distinction between what we perceive and what we think. But the division is no less present in our subjective nature. We overcome this polarity in the course of our development by bringing our own concept, the concept of what we love to do, the full development by bringing our concept to full outward manifestation. Thus, the intellectual as well as the moral life of human beings leads to the dual nature of humans, perceiving as thinking. Intellectual life overcomes the duality through cognition. Moral life overcomes it through the actual realization of the free spirit. So this vertical axis has to do with realizing the individual free spirit. Believe it or not, we're on the home stretch. Even though we're just on chapter 9 and we still have several to go, we actually are on the home stretch. Because chapter 9, in a certain sense, is the culmination. And it's the idea of freedom. Now we begin to see it. Yeah. Now, the first half of the book was about setting up how do we know. And now, in a certain sense, we can begin to see the possibility, how the idea of freedom can actually exist, coexist, in fact, to begin to blossom in the context of our picture, of our epistemological picture of how we actually function. Yeah? Yes?
So 9 is similar to 4, it makes you want to chuck the book across the room?
No, it's kind of similar to 5.
I liked it, it's just that it was so thick, it was like, we can't deal anymore.
It's thick, but each time you come back to it, it's so saturated. Yeah? It's not saturated with difficulty. I find it saturated with joy. There's just a lot of fruitfulness in it. 4 is more saturated with frustration.
I mean, 9 was easier, but 4 didn't. I'm like...
Yeah. Now, there's a beautiful picture on page 159. We're going to finish chapter 9 and move ahead. Nature makes, 159, nature makes human beings merely natural creatures. Nature makes us natural. We need to be natural. That's good. Healthy, yeah? Natural. Nature makes us natural. Society makes us in the law-abiding actors. We will act according to the laws of the land. So nature makes us natural. Society makes us law-abiding. Yeah? But only an individual can make himself or herself into a free being. Nature will not produce a free being, nor will society produce a free being. Only the individual who rises up out of nature and society and reaches up into the essence of their moral intuition can achieve freedom. Freedom can't be given. It can only be won. It can only be claimed by the human spirit who reaches up into the depths of the source of their I and draws from that source the ideas that they want to abide by, the ideas that they want to fulfill. Yeah? So nature makes us natural, society makes us law-abiding, but individual human beings can become free. See? So we have to honor this individuality. The spirit of the individual that lives within us is actually the source of freedom. Now, Kant says duty, bottom 159. Here, he's got to take care of Kant once again. Kant is still rearing his head. Kant says, duty, you exalted mighty name, you who contain nothing lovable, nothing ingratiatingly agreeable, but who demand submission, you who establish a law before which all inclinations fall dumb, though in secret they might work against it. So Kant's duty is an awesomely and unsympathetic character. You have to do it, like it or not. Now, so this is how Kant characterizes duty. If our task is to do our duty, we feel impinged upon, don't we? I mean, duty doesn't leave us free. In fact, quite the opposite. I can't because I have to do this. I want to do this, but I can't because I have to do this. That's a feeling of duty or obligation. Yeah? Now, there are certain duties that we have agreed to abide by, and we need to abide by them. Yeah? But in addition to the duties that we have to perform to be a law-abiding citizen, and even to be a natural human being, we do have to eat and sleep after all, and caffeine alone won't sustain us. So there are certain things that we have to abide by. But Rudolf Steiner says, but to the picture of duty, Rudolf Steiner says, a human being out of the consciousness of the free spirit replies, freedom, you friendly human name. You who contain everything morally beloved, everything that most dignifies my humanity, and who make me into no one's servant, yet you who do not merely establish a law, but wait for what my moral love itself will recognize as law, because it feels unfree in the face of every merely imposed law. This is the contrast between morality that is merely lawful, doing your duty, and morality that is free. So we get the contrast. So we love to be free, in fact. We can still do our duty where the duty is calling. But in addition to that, we can also find the source of our freedom. Now, over on page 48, paragraph 48, page 161, the bottom of the page, the human individual is the source of all morality and the center of earthly life. You could say this is awfully anthropomorphic, anthropocentric. Yes, it is. Because in fact, friends, as human beings, our job is to recognize who we are and to become. We need to incarnate our spirit so that we can actually so we can become who we are, you see? Mm-hmm. The opportunity to incarnate into a body on the earth is an opportunity for the human spirit to begin to take hold and become. And in a certain sense, you could say that's part of the mission of the earth, is to facilitate and to hinder so that the human being will do it well, to make it possible that the human being can be free. The difficulty of freedom is this, friends. This sounds like an aside, but it's not an aside. It's very important to note. God cannot create a free being. If God creates you to be free, He says, go and be free, you're going to say, yes, God, I promise, I'll be free, I promise. That's not freedom, that's obedience. So you can say, God can create everything, yes, but God cannot create a free being. If God creates us, we bear within us the stamp of the Creator. Remember our friend, yes? Was it a philosopher, 17th century. So anyway, we are free. God cannot make us free. All God can do is set the possibility up that we can achieve freedom. But He can't make us free if there is a God. Yeah? Nature won't make us free. Society won't make us free. And neither can God make us free. So if freedom is going to happen, who is it up to? It's up to the individual, you see. If I am to be free, it is up to me. So I need to realize that my task, if I want to become free, I have the possibility, but nobody's going to come up and grant it to me. I have to claim it. I have to become active. I have to find the intuitions that I love and decide that I love them and act upon them. In doing so, I am doing something that you could say God hopes we will become free, but God, His hands are tied. He can't make us free. Because if He creates us to be free, we are then disobeying Him. And obedience is not the same as freedom. You see the difference? So this is a difficult situation, friends. We begin to realize that we're in a privileged situation as humanity, because in a certain sense, God and the spiritual world, if there are such a thing, I have reason to believe there are, but you don't have to accept my interpretation of it. But nonetheless, we could say, if there were a God, you could say the possibility would have to be there that human beings can achieve freedom. But that means that the human being is, in a certain sense, in a privileged condition. It also has to be possible that we will not become free. Because freedom cannot be given, but if we don't rise up and claim it, it won't happen. It has to be possible that we won't achieve freedom. Which, in fact, that's what the adversaries are banking on. The adversaries are throwing obstacle after obstacle in their path hoping, well, in fact, they've been commanded to do that, if you will, because their job is to make it hard for us to become free. But actually, when we overcome the obstacles, we're becoming freer. So even the so-called adversaries are contributing to the education and to the potential freedom of humanity. But we have to do it ourselves. No spiritual being is going to come down and grant us freedom. We have to claim it as an individual. We have to become active. We have to take initiative. We have to take initiative ourselves. We have to initiate our freedom. But in fact, that's exactly what we love to do. It really is. That's what we want to do. So we're in a fortunate position. So the human individual is the source of all morality and the center of earthly life, bottom 161. States and societies exist because they turn out to be the necessary consequence of individual life. That states and societies then react upon individual life is just as understandable as the fact that budding, which exists because of a bull's horns, react upon the further development of horns, which would otherwise become stunted with prolonged disuse. In the same way, individuals would become stunted if they led isolated existences outside human community. It is precisely for this that the social order is formed, so that the social order can react favorably upon the individual. In other words, friends, there is something about recognizing one another that makes it more joyful and more possible for us to become free individuals. Do we see it? In other words, not only do we love what we're doing, but we love each other for striving to do what lives within us. So human community is really there to facilitate, not to hinder freedom, but in fact to facilitate and to make possible human beings recognizing and learning to love one another as well as to love what we're doing.